The frost had claimed the window again. Mei Lin Chen stood before the clouded glass, her breath adding another layer of fog to the barrier between her and the white world beyond. Montana in December was not cruel the way people were cruel. The snow did not judge. The wind did not whisper. The cold simply took what it wanted and moved on, indifferent to the four small lives depending on her to hold back the hunger one more day. Christmas Eve, 1883. The words felt hollow in her mind, like the tin plates arranged on the rough wooden table behind her, 4 plates in a perfect row. Daniel's plate, the largest because he was 13 now, and trying so hard to be the man his father had been. Tommy's plate beside it, smaller, the edge chipped from the time he dropped it in his excitement over a birthday that seemed like it belonged to another lifetime. Lily's plate, the one with the painted flowers she tried to preserve by eating so carefully, so slowly, making every meal last. And Rose's tiny plate, the smallest, with the wooden spoon their father had carved resting beside it like a promise no one could keep anymore. Mei Lin pressed her palms against the table's surface, feeling the grain of the wood beneath her fingers. Robert had built this table 7 years ago when they had first arrived in Montana territory. She could still see him, sleeves rolled up despite the spring chill, measuring twice and cutting once the way he always did. Careful, methodical. A man who believed that if you did things right, if you worked hard and kept your head down, America would let you build a life. He had been wrong. The fever had taken him in February 10 months ago. 10 months that felt like 10 years. 10 months of watching their carefully built world collapse like a house made of cards in a wind that never stopped blowing. The townspeople had come to the funeral, a small handful of them. Doc Fletcher had been there, his weathered face kind beneath his hat. The blacksmith had come, standing at the back, saying nothing. Mrs. Brennan had brought flowers, her eyes apologetic in a way her words were not quite brave enough to be. But funerals were easy. Funerals were one day. It was all the days after that revealed who people really were. The laundry business Robert had built disappeared within 3 months. Not with announcements or confrontations, just quiet shifts. Mrs. Brennan stopped bringing her linens, apologizing that her husband had found other arrangements. The boarding house started doing their own washing. The mine owner's wife simply never came back. And when Mei Lin saw her in town, the woman's eyes slid away like water off stone. Mei Lin had understood the message. A Chinese man working hard was tolerable. A Chinese widow with 4 children was a problem looking for a place to happen. Better to make her invisible. Better to let the Montana winter do what hate was too polite to do directly. The garden had been their backup, the insurance against lean times. Robert had chosen the location carefully, teaching Daniel how to read the soil, showing Tommy how to build the irrigation channels that would carry snowmelt to thirsty roots. Mei Lin had planted seeds from the precious packets her mother had sent from San Francisco, vegetables that reminded her of home while feeding her American children. Then summer came with its drought, 6 months without rain. The sun that should have nourished became an enemy, baking the earth until it cracked like old leather. Mei Lin had carried water in buckets until her shoulders ached and her hands bled. The children had helped, even little Rose, dragging her small pail with determination that broke her mother's heart. It hadn't been enough. By August, the garden was dust and memories. Now it was Christmas Eve, and the rice sack hanging on the wall held maybe 2 handfuls of grain. The dried fish Robert had put up last winter was gone. The root vegetables from their few surviving plants had run out a week ago. There was hot water for tea, and that was all. That was everything they had to offer Christmas morning. Above her head, the loft floorboards creaked, small feet padding across wood. Mei Lin held her breath, listening. Rose was awake. Of course Rose was awake, 6 years old, and Christmas Eve still held magic in her innocent heart. "Mama?" The voice drifted down, soft as snowfall. "Mama, is it Christmas yet?" Mei Lin's throat tightened. She gripped the table edge until her knuckles went white. "Not yet, precious one," she called back, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The sun has not risen. Try to sleep a little longer." "But I heard Santa's reindeer on the roof." Hope, pure and unearned, colored every word. "I heard them, Mama. He's coming, isn't he?" Before Mei Lin could answer, Daniel's voice cut through the darkness of the loft, older, trying to sound sure of things he couldn't possibly be sure of. "Rose, come back to bed. Let Mama rest." "But the stockings," Rose insisted. Mei Lin could picture her, standing at the edge of the loft in her thin nightgown, looking at the 4 stockings hanging from the mantel below. Empty stockings, limp fabric that held nothing but the weight of promises Mei Lin couldn't fulfill. "The stockings will be there in the morning," Daniel said, and Mei Lin heard the lie in his voice, heard him trying to be his father, trying to protect his mother from another moment of heartbreak, trying to hold together a family that was coming apart like cloth worn too thin. "Go to sleep, little sister." Tommy's voice joined in, gentler than Daniel's, the peacemaker he'd always been. "Morning will come faster if you sleep." Lily said nothing, but Mei Lin knew she was awake too, listening, understanding more than an 8-year-old should have to understand. The loft fell quiet again. Mei Lin stood in the near darkness, lit only by the embers of a fire she was keeping deliberately low to conserve the wood that was itself running dangerously short. She should build it up. The children needed warmth, but the wood pile outside was so small now, and there were so many weeks of winter left to face. She closed her eyes, searching for prayers. Her mother had taught her the old prayers, the ones to ancestors and spirits that govern the world beyond sight. The townspeople prayed to Jesus, to a God who promised to feed the ravens and clothe the lilies. Mei Lin had tried both kinds of prayer in the months since Robert died. She had burned incense at the small shrine she kept hidden in a drawer. She had knelt beside the children at bedtime, teaching them the Lord's Prayer the way Robert had wanted. Neither heaven had answered. Outside, the wind moaned through the gaps in the cabin's log walls, a sound like grief-given voice. Mei Lin opened her eyes and stared at the 4 empty plates. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tomorrow she would have to watch her children's faces when they discovered Santa Claus did not visit cabins where the fire burned low and the rice sack hung empty on the wall. Tomorrow she would have to explain why prayers went unanswered and stockings stayed flat. Tomorrow she would have to be strong enough to endure their disappointment while hiding her own failure. She was not sure she had that strength left. 5 miles to the east, on a ridge that overlooked the valley where scattered homesteads dotted the snow-covered landscape, another soul sat awake in the hours before Christmas dawn. Jake Morrison occupied a house too large for one man, at a table built for a family that existed only in memory, and the ache that never quite faded. The chair across from him was empty. It had been empty for 12 years. 12 years since he'd lost Sarah. 12 years since he'd buried her on the hill behind the house, along with the son who'd never drawn breath. 12 years of eating alone, sleeping alone, existing in a silence so complete it had become a kind of companion. The ranch house Sarah had dreamed of stood finished around him, mocking him with its emptiness. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, a kitchen big enough for a family of 8. He'd built it for her, for the children they would have, for the life they'd planned during their brief 3 years of marriage. After she died, he'd finished it anyway, working like a man possessed, as if completing her dream might somehow bring her back. It hadn't. Now he lived in 2 rooms of a house designed for joy, leaving the rest to gather dust and echoes. The spare bedrooms upstairs stayed closed. The dining room he'd built for holiday gatherings held nothing but furniture covered in sheets. He cooked simple meals on a stove meant for elaborate feasts, and he ate them at a table that could seat 12 but held only his single plate and the ghost of everything he'd lost. The bottle of whiskey sat before him, nearly full. He'd poured a single glass hours ago, more ritual than desire. He didn't drink to forget anymore. Forgetting was impossible. He drank when he drank at all, just to feel something other than the vast numbness that had become his constant state. On the mantel above the fireplace, Sarah's photograph watched him from its frame. 23 years old forever, smiling with that mixture of joy and mischief that had made him fall in love with her the first time he'd seen her at the church social. She'd been visiting her aunt, a city girl from Philadelphia, trying to decide if she could love a rancher enough to love Montana. She decided yes, and for 3 years Jake had been the luckiest man in the territory. Then winter came in 1871, and Sarah went into labor 2 months early. Doc Fletcher had tried everything. Sarah had fought with every ounce of strength in her small frame. The baby, a boy, had been born blue and silent. Sarah had held him for 10 minutes before the bleeding started. By dawn, Jake was a widower with 2 graves to dig in frozen ground. He'd made her a promise that day, standing over the fresh-turned earth and on the hill. He'd promised he would never forget her, never replace her, never dishonor her memory by trying to build a new life from the ruins of the one they'd shared. For 12 years, he'd kept that promise. For 12 years, he'd withdrawn from the world, speaking to people only when necessity demanded it, attending to his ranch with mechanical efficiency, avoiding anything that might lead to connection, to caring, to the possibility of loss. The townspeople had tried at first. Neighbors had brought casseroles and sympathy. The church had extended invitations. Women, widows, and spinsters both had made their interest clear through meaningful glances and carefully arranged encounters. Jake had politely, firmly turned away all of it. Eventually, they'd stop trying. He'd become known simply as the hermit rancher, the man who preferred cattle to people, solitude to society. It was easier that way, safer. You couldn't lose what you never let yourself have. But 6 months ago, something had shifted. 6 months ago, he'd noticed the Chen family struggling in the wake of Robert Chen's death. Jake had known Robert slightly, the way neighbors knew each other in sparse country, where 5 miles between homesteads counted as close. Robert had been a good man, quiet and hardworking, the kind who kept his promises and paid his debts. His death had been quick, a winter pneumonia that turned deadly before anyone realized how serious it was. Jake had attended the funeral from a distance, watching the small gathering, noting how few people came. He'd felt a kinship with Robert Chen in that moment. Two men who'd worked hard and died having built less than they'd hoped to build. Then he'd started noticing the widow. Not deliberately, not at first. His ranch occupied higher ground, and from certain vantage points, he could see down into the valley where the Chen cabin sat. He had a telescope he used for spotting cattle, for watching weather patterns, for tracking predators that might threaten his stock. One day, idly scanning the valley, he'd happened to point it toward the Chen place. He'd seen the oldest boy, Daniel, walking. Just walking in no particular direction, his shoulders slumped in a way that spoke of burdens too heavy for 13-year-old frames. Jake had watched him sit on a rock for an hour, staring at nothing, carrying weight invisible but real. The next day, Jake had watched Mei Lin Chen working in her garden, battling the drought with buckets of water she carried from the creek. He'd seen the way she moved, the determined set of her shoulders, the refusal to quit even when quitting would have been the reasonable choice. He told himself it was just observation, just awareness. A neighbor keeping an eye on another neighbor, nothing more. But the observation became a habit. Every morning he found himself scanning the valley, checking on the Chen family. He saw the garden die despite her efforts. He saw the children getting thinner. He saw Daniel make the long walk into town looking for work, only to return empty-handed and defeated. He told himself it wasn't his business. They were strangers, really. Different worlds. A Chinese widow and her children, a white hermit rancher. What could he possibly offer them besides interference? But he kept watching. 2 weeks ago, he'd seen something that haunted his dreams. Little Rose, the youngest, had been playing in the snow. She'd been twirling, arms out, the way children do when they're young enough to find joy in simple things. Then she'd simply stopped, swayed, collapsed into the snow like a puppet with cut strings. Mei Lin had come running from the cabin, scooping up the child, carrying her inside. Jake had stood on his ridge, telescope forgotten in his hand, watching the cabin as if he could see through the walls to know if the child was all right. He'd stood there for an hour in the cold before he finally saw smoke increase from the chimney, a sign that someone was moving around inside, that life continued. That night, he hadn't slept. He'd paced his empty house, arguing with himself. It wasn't his place to interfere. He'd promised Sarah he would never love again, never have a family again. Getting involved with the Chen family would mean caring, and caring led to loss, and he couldn't survive another loss. But children were starving 5 miles away. A woman was fighting a battle she couldn't win, too proud to beg and too isolated to find help even if she tried. At midnight, Jake had walked to Sarah's grave on the hill. The moon had been bright enough to read by, casting long shadows across the snow. He'd stood before her headstone, the one he'd carved himself with her name and the dates that bracketed the too brief life. "I don't know what to do," he'd said to the stone, to the memory, to the ghost of the woman who'd made him believe in goodness. "There are children starving, Sarah, a woman trying to hold her family together with nothing but will. If I help them, it means breaking my promise to you. It means caring again. It means risking everything I've been protecting myself from." The wind had been his only answer, cold and indifferent. But in his mind, he'd heard Sarah's voice as clearly as if she stood beside him. Sarah, who'd had a tender heart beneath her city-bred manners. Sarah, who'd wept over injured animals and scolded him when he was too harsh with ranch hands who made mistakes. Sarah, who'd believed people should help people, that wealth was meaningless if it wasn't shared, that love was the only thing that mattered in the end. Jake Morrison, the memory of her voice said, tinged with the exasperation she'd used when he was being particularly stubborn, "When did you become a coward? When did you start using my death as an excuse to stop living? Those children need help. That woman needs help. And you need to be reminded that you have a heart under all that grief and pride." He'd stood there until the cold drove him back inside, but the conversation with the ghost of Sarah had settled something in his mind. The next day he'd ridden 40 miles to a town where nobody knew him. He'd taken with him the one valuable possession he still owned, his father's gold pocket watch. It was the last link to his own family, all of whom were gone now. The watch was engraved with his grandfather's initials, had traveled across an ocean and half a continent, had marked time through 3 generations of Morrison men. He'd sold it to a jeweler for enough money to buy the supplies a family of 5 would need to survive the winter. The jeweler had tried to negotiate, sensing Jake's desperation to sell, but Jake had held firm. He knew what the watch was worth, and he knew what the Chen family needed. With the money, he'd gone to the general store. Flour, salt, sugar, coffee, a side of smoked beef, potatoes, dried apples, rice. He'd been careful about the rice, asking the clerk which kind the Chinese preferred, enduring the man's curious look without explanation. Hard candies for the children, because children needed sweetness even in hard times. Firewood, because his own woodlot could spare it and theirs clearly couldn't. He'd loaded it all into his wagon, covered it with canvas, and driven home. Then he'd waited for Christmas, because somehow it seemed right. Somehow Christmas was the proper time to break 12 years of isolation, to risk caring again, to step out of the prison of grief he'd built around himself. Now it was Christmas Eve, turning into Christmas morning. In a few hours, dawn would break over Montana. In a few hours, he would hitch up his draft horse, load the supplies, and drive 5 miles down into the valley. In a few hours, he would knock on a stranger's door and try to remember how to talk to people, how to explain why he'd come, how to offer help without making it feel like charity. He was terrified. 12 years of isolation had left him awkward, uncertain, half convinced he'd forgotten how to have a normal conversation. What would he say? How would he explain watching them from a distance without sounding like some kind of predator? How would he make Mei Lin Chen understand that this wasn't pity, wasn't obligation, but something he needed to do for reasons he couldn't fully articulate even to himself? Jake stood, pacing the empty house. He rehearsed opening lines in his mind, discarded them all as inadequate. He imagined her response, the wariness that a lone woman would rightfully feel toward a strange man appearing at her isolated cabin. He imagined the children's faces, hoped they would be glad, feared they would be frightened. He walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. Somewhere in that darkness, 5 miles away, Mei Lin Chen stood at her own window, looking at her own darkness. 2 kinds of empty, 2 kinds of alone. 2 people who didn't know that in a few hours, everything was about to change. The winter dawn came slowly to Montana, as if the sun itself was reluctant to face another frozen day. Mei Lin had not slept. She'd kept vigil by the dying fire, feeding it just enough to keep the cabin's interior above freezing, rationing the precious wood against the weeks of winter still to come. When pale light finally began to seep through the frosted windows, she heard the children stirring in the loft. Whispers, carefully quiet, trying not to wake Mama, who they assumed was sleeping. The soft sounds of them checking their stockings, the crushing silence when they found them empty. "Mama!" Rose's voice smaller now, hope beginning to curdle into confusion. "Mama, Santa didn't come." Mei Lin rose from her chair, every joint stiff from cold and sleeplessness. "Come down, children," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Come down and we will have Christmas together." They descended the ladder one by one. Daniel first, trying to look like a man, failing to hide the disappointment in his eyes. Tommy next, already working to paste on a brave smile. Lily clutching the small cloth doll she'd had since she was 3, the only toy that had survived their journey from San Francisco. And Rose, last, her little face struggling to understand why this Christmas was so different from the ones in stories. Mei Lin gathered them around the table, the 4 empty plates between them like an accusation. "I know there is no food," she began, choosing honesty because lies would only make this harder. I know the stockings are empty. I know this is not the Christmas you hoped for. It's all right, Mama, Daniel said quickly, too quickly. We understand, we're not hungry. The lie was so transparent, so brave, that Mei Lin's heart broke a little more. We can pretend, Tommy offered. Pretend the plates are full. Lily can tell us a story while we eat pretend food. Lily nodded, rallying. I can tell about the Christmas in China, the one Grandma told us about, the one with the lanterns and the special dumplings. Rose looked from one sibling to another, trying to understand the game they were playing, trying to be part of the pretending. But she was 6, and hunger was not something 6-year-olds could easily pretend away. Mei Lin opened her mouth, searching for words that might make this bearable, might turn starvation into some kind of lesson about resilience or faith or family bonds stronger than full bellies. Then cutting through the morning quiet came a sound that stopped her breath. The muffled crunch of hooves on snow, the creak of wagon wheels, the jingle of a harness. Mei Lin's head snapped toward the door. The children froze, listening. No one came out here. Not since Robert died. Not since the town decided the Chen family was easier to ignore than to acknowledge. She moved to the window, wiping away the frost with her sleeve. A wagon was approaching, pulled by a massive draft horse whose breath plumed white in the frigid air. A single figure sat on the bench, hunched against the cold in a heavy buffalo coat, face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Mei Lin's first instinct was fear. A lone man, an isolated cabin, a woman with 4 children and no protection. Her hand moved instinctively to the kitchen knife on the counter. The wagon stopped in front of the cabin. The man climbed down, moving with the stiffness of someone who'd been sitting in the cold for a long time. He was tall, she saw, broad-shouldered. He stood beside his wagon for a moment, seeming to gather himself, then turned toward the cabin. Mrs. Chen? His voice was deep, roughened by cold and disuse. I need to talk to you, please. Mei Lin hesitated, then stepped to the door, opening it just wide enough to speak through. Who are you? What do you want? The man pulled off his hat, and she got her first clear look at his face. Weathered, late 40s or early 50s, with blue eyes that seemed to carry their own kind of winter. A face that had forgotten how to smile, but remembered sorrow well enough. Name's Jake Morrison. I ranch 5 miles east. I've come to deliver some supplies. Christmas supplies, from the church. The lie was obvious even as he spoke it. His eyes shifted, his jaw tightened. He was, Mei Lin realized, possibly the worst liar she'd ever encountered. The church? She kept her voice neutral, skeptical. The church sent you? Jake seemed to realize his mistake. His shoulders slumped slightly. Well, not exactly sent, more like, I volunteered. Pastor mentioned your family might need help. Another lie, equally transparent. Mei Lin felt a flicker of something that might have been amusement if she weren't so exhausted, so hungry, so desperate. This giant man with his kind eyes and terrible lies was standing in her dooryard on Christmas morning, trying to help while being too proud or too awkward to admit it directly. What is your name? She asked, though he'd already told her. Jake Morrison, ma'am. We've seen each other in town, I think. I keep to myself mostly, but I know your late husband was a good man. I'm sorry for your loss. The words were simple, but something in his voice made them real. This was not empty condolence. This was a man who understood loss. Thank you, Mei Lin said quietly. Then more sharply, why are you really here, Mr. Morrison? Before Jake could answer, Rose appeared in the doorway behind her mother, squeezing through the gap. The little girl looked up at the giant stranger, then past him to the wagon, then back to his face. Did you bring food? She asked, with the directness only children possess. Jake's expression transformed. The weathered hardness softened, and Mei Lin saw something she hadn't expected. Gentleness. This hard-edged hermit, looking at her youngest daughter, wore the face of a man who remembered tenderness. Yes, he said simply, I brought food. For us? Rose's voice was small, disbelieving. For you. Wait. The question was pure innocence, pure confusion. Why would a stranger bring food to children he'd never met? Jake knelt in the snow, bringing himself down to Rose's eye level. Up close, Mei Lin could see the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the loneliness that sat on him like a visible weight. Because it's Christmas, he said, and because I had extra, and because little girls shouldn't be hungry on Christmas morning. Rose swayed. For a terrible moment, Mei Lin thought her daughter was about to faint again. She reached for her, but Jake was faster. His large hands caught the child gently, steadying her. When did she eat last? He asked, looking up at Mei Lin, and there was no judgment in his voice, only concern. Yesterday morning, Mei Lin admitted, shame burning her cheeks. A little rice. That's all that was left. Jake's jaw tightened. He stood, still supporting Rose, and looked at Mei Lin with eyes that had seen too much and understood more than she wanted them to. We need to get food into these children. Now, may I come in? Mei Lin stepped back, opening the door fully. What choice did she have? Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, and this man, this stranger with his terrible lies and gentle eyes, was offering survival. Jake carried Rose inside, the other three children parting before him like water around a stone. He set her carefully on the bed in the corner, then turned back to the door. I'll bring in the supplies. He made 3 trips, carrying sacks and bundles that he set carefully on the floor. Flour, rice, salt, sugar, coffee, a side of smoked beef wrapped in canvas, potatoes, dried apples, hard candies in a paper bag, and firewood, armloads of it, building up the depleted pile beside the stove. The children watched in silence, eyes growing wider with each addition. Daniel's mouth was half open, disbelief warring with desperate hope on his face. Tommy had started crying silently, tears running down his thin cheeks. Lily clutched her doll tighter, as if afraid this miracle might disappear if she looked away. Jake worked efficiently, saying nothing, avoiding everyone's eyes. When the wagon was empty and the cabin was suddenly impossibly full of more food than they'd seen in months, he stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, seeming to realize for the first time that he was now in their space, that his presence was an intrusion however welcome the supplies might be. I should go, he said, reaching for his hat. No. Mei Lin surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. You brought all this. The least we can do is offer you breakfast. We can cook now, thanks to you. Jake hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. 12 years of isolation had not prepared him for this, for being in a home, around people, around the noise and warmth of family. I don't want to impose, he started. You have saved our lives, Mei Lin said quietly. Breakfast is not an imposition. It is the smallest possible thanks. Something in her tone decided him. He nodded, setting his hat back down. All right, if it's not too much trouble. Daniel, build up the fire, Mei Lin commanded, already moving toward the supplies with a purpose she hadn't felt in months. Tommy, fetch the big pot. Lily, get the rice ready. We're going to make a Christmas breakfast that we'll remember for the rest of our lives. The cabin came alive. For the first time since Robert's death, there was movement with purpose, sounds of preparation, the smell of food beginning to cook. Jake stood to the side, clearly out of his depth, watching the transformation his arrival had caused. Rose, recovered enough to move, appeared at his side. She slipped her small hand into his large calloused one. Thank you, she said, looking up at him with eyes that held more gratitude than any 6-year-old should have to feel. Jake looked down at the tiny hand in his, and Mei Lin saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. You're welcome, little one. The meal came together with the organized chaos that only a mother with 4 children can orchestrate. Rice steaming in the pot, beef sizzling in the pan, the cabin filling with scents that were almost painfully wonderful after months of near starvation. Jake, after some prodding, helped where he could. He showed Daniel how to slice the beef properly, thick enough to satisfy, but thin enough to cook through. He taught Tommy how to test the rice for doneness. He moved with a competence that spoke of years of cooking for himself, but also with a gentleness that surprised Mei Lin. This was not a man accustomed to gentleness, but he was trying. When the food was ready, they sat around the table. The 4 plates that had been empty now held more food than the children had seen in months. Jake had insisted on eating from a tin cup, saying he didn't need much, but Mei Lin had overruled him, producing Robert's plate from the shelf where she'd kept it hidden, unable to use it but unable to put it away. The symbolism was not lost on either of them. Robert's plate, feeding the man who had saved Robert's family. They ate in near silence, the children too overwhelmed to speak, Jake too unused to conversation to start one. But it was a comfortable silence, the silence of shared necessity, of hunger being satisfied, of warmth and safety temporarily secured. Mei Lin watched Jake watch her children. She saw the way his eyes lingered on Rose, the smallest and most vulnerable. The way he noticed Tommy's too thin wrists when the boy reached for more rice. The way he nodded approval when Daniel ate with careful slowness, mindful that too much food too fast after starvation could cause sickness. This man understood hunger, understood suffering, understood how to help without humiliating. After the meal, the children, full-bellied for the first time in weeks, began to grow drowsy. The warmth of the fire Jake had built up, the weight of the food in their stomachs, the emotional exhaustion of too much hope deferred and then suddenly fulfilled, all combined to pull them towards sleep. Rest, Mei Lin told them. Rest and be grateful. One by one, they found places to curl up. Daniel on the bed beside Rose, Tommy and Lily on the floor near the fire, wrapped in the blankets that were suddenly warm enough now that the fire burned high. Jake stood, reaching for his hat again. I should let you all rest. You've had a long morning. The snow is getting heavier, Mei Lin observed, looking out the window. It was true. What had been light flurries when Jake arrived was now a full snowfall, the kind that could turn into a blizzard without much warning. It's not safe to travel. Jake looked out the window, assessing. I've driven through worse. Perhaps, but why risk it? The children are safe now, fed and warm. That's what matters. You've given us that gift. Let us give you the gift of shelter until the storm passes. Jake hesitated, every instinct clearly telling him to run, to retreat to his safe isolation, to get away before this temporary connection could become something more dangerous. But the snow was heavy, the road was difficult, and somewhere under all that self-protection, Jake Morrison was tired of being alone. Just until the storm passes, he agreed. Mei Lin smiled, the first genuine smile she'd allowed herself in months. Just until the storm passes. Night fell early, the way it did in Montana winters. The storm that had threatened became real, wind howling around the cabin's corners, snow piling against the walls. Inside, the fire burned bright. The children slept safe. And two adults who'd been strangers that morning sat in the warm silence of a crisis survived. Jake had taken Robert's old rocking chair, too small for his large frame, but the only seat available besides the floor. Mei Lin sat across from him, mending a shirt by firelight, her needle moving in and out of the fabric with practiced precision. You said you ranch 5 miles east, she said after a long silence. That's the Morrison place, the big house on the ridge? Jake nodded. Built it 12 years ago. Too big for one person, but I built it anyway. You live alone? Yes. Always? Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her in the sleeping quiet. I had a wife, Sarah. She died in childbirth 12 years ago. The baby died too. A son. After that, I couldn't see the point of people anymore. Mei Lin's hands stilled on the mending. I'm sorry, I know that kind of loss. Your husband, how long? 10 months, pneumonia. He went out in the snow to help a neighbor repair a fence. Came home soaked and shivering. 3 days later, he was gone. They sat with that shared knowledge. Two people who understood that grief was not something you got over, but something you learned to carry. The children, Jake said, watching the sleeping forms by the fire. They're good children. You've done well with them. Robert did well with them. I'm just trying not to fail them completely. You're not failing, you're surviving. There's a difference. Mei Lin looked at him, this giant stranger who'd appeared like an answer to prayers she'd stopped believing would be heard. Why did you really come, Jake Morrison? The truth this time. Jake met her eyes. In the firelight, the blue of them seemed deeper, sadder, more honest than in the harsh light of day. Because I've been watching you struggle for months. From my ridge, I can see your cabin. I saw your garden die. I saw your boy walking to town looking for work. I saw you carrying water until your shoulders shook, and I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business. Told myself I'd promised my wife I'd never care about anyone again. Told myself 1,000 lies. He paused, jaw working. Then 2 weeks ago, I saw your littlest one faint in the snow, and I realized I couldn't lie anymore, couldn't hide anymore. So I sold my father's watch and bought supplies and drove down here, scared out of my mind that you'd reject my help or think I was some kind of predator or just tell me to leave you alone. Mei Lin felt tears prick her eyes. You sold your father's watch? It was the only valuable thing I had left. Seemed like a fair trade, a dead man's watch for living children's lives. They looked at each other across the dim space and something passed between them. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. Two damaged people who'd been alone too long, finding unexpected connection in the midst of winter. Rose stirred in her sleep, murmuring something neither adult could make out. Then clearly, in a voice still thick with dreams, Papa Christmas came. Papa Christmas saved us. Jake's breath caught. His hands gripped the arms of the rocking chair until the wood creaked. Mei Lin saw the tears in his eyes, saw 12 years of suppressed emotion suddenly threatening to break free. She's dreaming, Mei Lin said softly. She doesn't mean, I know what she means, Jake whispered, and it terrifies me. They sat in silence as the storm raged outside and the fire crackled within, and four children slept the deep sleep of bellies finally full. Somewhere in that silence, in that warmth, in that unexpected Christmas night, two frozen hearts began, just barely, to thaw. The last thing Mei Lin thought before she finally let herself sleep was that maybe, just maybe, prayers were answered. Just not always in the ways you expected, not with thunder or lightning or obvious miracles, but with a quiet man in a buffalo coat, awkward and damaged and terrified, appearing in your dooryard on Christmas morning with food and wood and something that looked almost like hope. Outside, the Montana winter continued its relentless assault. But inside the small cabin, for the first time in 10 months, Mei Lin Chen and her four children were warm, fed, and safe. And a man who'd been alone for 12 years discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself care again, even when every instinct screams that caring leads to loss. Christmas morning, 1883. The day two kinds of empty met and found in each other the beginning of something that looked almost like fullness. The snow continued to fall, covering the world in white. Inside the cabin, the fire burned on. The morning after Christmas dawned clear and cold, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Jake Morrison woke in Robert Chen's old rocking chair, his back protesting the awkward angle, his neck stiff from sleeping upright. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then he heard the soft breathing of children, felt the warmth of a fire that someone had tended through the night, and reality settled over him like a weight. He'd stayed. He'd promised himself it would be just one night, just until the storm passed. But lying there in the gray dawn light, watching Mei Lin sleep in the chair across from him, her head tilted at an angle that would make her neck ache when she woke, her hands still holding the mending she'd been working on when exhaustion finally claimed her, Jake felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for 12 years beginning, just barely, to crack. He stood carefully, trying not to wake anyone. The children were scattered around the room in various states of repose. Daniel on the bed, one arm flung protectively across Rose. Tommy curled near the fire like a puppy seeking warmth. Lily with her cloth doll clutched tight to her chest, her face peaceful in sleep. They looked different than they had yesterday morning. Less gaunt, less desperate. The simple act of one good meal, one warm night, had brought color back to cheeks that had been gray with hunger. Jake stood looking at them, these children who were strangers to him 24 hours ago, and felt the terror rise again. Caring was dangerous. Caring led to loss. He should leave now, while he still could, while the connection was still new enough to break cleanly. He moved toward his coat and hat, hung on a peg by the door. His hand was reaching for them when he heard it. A soft plinking sound, rhythmic and insistent. Water. Dripping. He looked up and saw the dark stain on the ceiling beam, saw the small puddle forming on the floor beneath it. The roof was leaking. Jake stood there, coat in hand, looking at that leak. He could leave. Should leave. Let Mei Lin deal with it herself the way she'd been dealing with everything else. It wasn't his problem. Wasn't his responsibility. But he could see how it would go. Mei Lin would try to patch it herself, climbing up on that icy roof with inadequate tools and no one to hold the ladder. She'd fall, probably. Break something. Leave four children orphaned in the middle of a Montana winter. Jake hung his coat back on the peg. When Mei Lin woke an hour later, she found him outside, boots crunching in the fresh snow, studying the roofline with the practiced eye of a man who'd built his share of buildings. She came to the door wrapped in a shawl, her breath misting in the morning air. "Mr. Morrison, I thought you'd be gone by now." Jake didn't look at her, kept his eyes on the roof. "Can't leave you with a leak. Dangerous in winter. Ice gets in, the whole structure could fail." "I can manage." "I'm sure you can, but I'm already here, and I know what I'm doing. Won't take more than a few hours to patch it proper." Mei Lin was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "You're finding reasons to stay." "I'm fixing a roof that needs fixing." Jake finally looked at her, saw the understanding in her dark eyes, the question she wasn't quite asking. "Storm's over. I could leave after, if you want me to." The question hung between them in the cold air. Mei Lin looked back into the cabin, where four children were beginning to stir, where the fire still burned warm, where for the first time in 10 months her home felt like something other than a slowly sinking ship. "The fence is broken too," she said quietly. "The coyotes have been getting close to the chickens. Robert always meant to fix it, but then—" She trailed off, didn't need to finish. "If you're going to stay to fix the roof, you might as well fix the fence too." Jake felt relief and terror in equal measure. "Fence too then, probably take me through tomorrow." "Probably." Mei Lin's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile but was close. "I'll make breakfast. You'll need your strength." And so it began. The pattern that would define the next 5 weeks. Every day, Jake would plan to leave. Every day, he would find one more thing that needed fixing, one more repair that couldn't wait, one more reason to stay just a little bit longer. The roof patch led to discovering rotted boards that needed replacing. The fence repair revealed a weakened post that had to be reset. The woodpile was too low, and didn't she know that cutting wood before it was properly seasoned made it burn too fast? Mei Lin watched this dance with a mixture of amusement and growing concern. She knew what he was doing, just as she knew what she was doing by letting him do it. They were both lying to themselves, both pretending this was about practical necessity when it was really about something neither of them was quite ready to name. But the children had no such hesitation. To them, Jake's continued presence was a gift they accepted with the straightforward joy of the young. Daniel followed him everywhere, absorbing knowledge like a sponge absorbs water. Jake taught him how to hold a hammer, how to sight along a board to check for warp, how to measure twice and cut once because wood and nails cost money that couldn't be wasted. "My pa used to say that," Daniel mentioned one afternoon, watching Jake mark a cut line. "Measure twice, cut once." Jake paused, looking at the boy, 13 years old and trying so hard to be a man. "Your pa was right, it's good advice." "Did your pa teach you that?" "He did, among other things." Jake made the cut, the saw moving smoothly through the wood. Funny how the important things, the things that really matter, they get passed down. Father to son, son to his son someday. Daniel was quiet watching the saw work. "I don't have a PA to teach me anymore." "No, but you've got a good ma, and she's teaching you things your pa can't. How to be strong when everything's falling apart. How to take care of family. How to keep your dignity when people try to take it from you." Jake finished the cut, set down the saw. "Those are harder lessons than carpentry, Daniel, and more important." The boy's eyes were bright with tears he was too proud to shed. "Will you teach me the other things too? The carpentry and the hunting and the horse things?" Jake's throat tightened. This was how it happened. This was how you got tangled up in other people's lives. How you started caring. How you set yourself up for the inevitable loss. He should say no. Should explain that he was just a neighbor helping out temporarily. That Daniel shouldn't count on him being around. "Yeah," Jake heard himself say instead. "I'll teach you." Tommy was easier in some ways. The 10-year-old didn't carry the weight of responsibility that bowed his older brother's shoulders. He was pure enthusiasm, all questions and energy, and the kind of optimism that hadn't yet learned to protect itself. He appointed himself Jake's assistant, handing him tools, holding boards steady, chattering constantly in a way that should have been annoying but somehow wasn't. "My ma says you live all alone in a big house," Tommy said one day, squinting up at Jake in the weak winter sunlight. "Doesn't that make you lonely?" Jake hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "I manage. But don't you wish you had people to talk to and eat with and stuff?" "I've got cattle. They're decent company." Tommy considered this seriously. "Cattle can't hug you, though, or tell you jokes, or play games. No, they can't do those things." "Then I think you must be very lonely, even if you don't say it." The pronouncement was delivered with absolute certainty. "But you're not lonely here, are you?" Jake looked down at the worm, at his open face and unguarded eyes, and felt something crack a little wider in his chest. "No, son, I'm not lonely here." Lily was the quiet one, the observer. She didn't demand Jake's attention the way her brothers did. Instead, she orbited around him like a small moon, watching, listening, occasionally offering observations that were startlingly perceptive for an 8-year-old. She showed him her drawings, careful sketches of birds and flowers, and the cabin in different seasons. Jake, who knew nothing about art, found himself studying them seriously, noting the way she captured not just shapes, but something essential about her subjects. "This one," he said, pointing to a sketch of a chickadee, "you've got the way it cocks its head just right, like it's asking a question." Lily beamed. "That's what I was trying to show. Most people just say it's a nice bird. It is a nice bird, but it's more than that. You're seeing deeper. The girl's smile was pure sunshine. From that moment on, she brought him every drawing, seeking not praise but understanding. And Jake, who'd spent 12 years trying not to see anything deeply, found himself looking at the world through her eyes and remembering when he'd still believed beauty mattered. Rose, though. Rose was the one who terrified him most. The 6-year-old had decided with the absolute certainty of the very young that Jake was hers now. She followed him everywhere her small legs could manage, chattering about everything and nothing, demanding to be picked up when she got tired, falling asleep against his shoulder while he worked. She called him Mr. Jake in a way that sounded dangerously close to something else, something more permanent. One evening after the children had gone to bed, Mei Lin found Jake sitting on the porch steps despite the cold, staring out at the dark. "You're brooding," she observed, settling beside him. "You've been brooding for 3 days." "I'm thinking." "Brooding." She pulled her shawl tighter. "About what?" Jake was silent for a long moment. "About how easy it would be to just stay, keep fixing things, keep teaching Daniel and listening to Tommy and looking at Lily's drawings, keep letting Rose fall asleep on my shoulder." He turned to look at Mei Lin, his eyes dark in the dim light from the cabin window. About how dangerous that would be. Dangerous to whom? To all of us, but mostly to them. Children get attached, Mei Lin. They start counting on things, on people, and then those people leave or digambish or disappoint them, and they're left with another hole in their lives they have to learn to live around. So your solution is to leave before they get too attached? Before you get too attached? My solution is to remember that I'm not their father. I'm just a man who brought them Christmas dinner and stuck around to fix a few things. Mei Lin was quiet, and in that silence Jake heard everything she wasn't saying. Heard the question of whether he was talking about the children's attachment or his own. Whether he was protecting them or protecting himself. Robert used to say, Mei Lin began slowly, that the only way to avoid the pain of loss was to never love anything. He said it was a coward's way, that the pain was worth it for the love. Robert was a braver man than I am. I don't think that's true. I think you're terrified of exactly the same thing I am. Of caring again, of losing again, of surviving another loss. She stood, looked down at him with eyes that understood too much. But being afraid doesn't make you a coward, Jake. Running from the fear does. She went inside, leaving him alone with the cold and his thoughts and the undeniable truth that she was right. He was running, had been running for 12 years. The question was whether he was finally ready to stop. The town discovered them in the 3rd week of January. Jake had been careful, making his supply runs to a different town 40 miles west, avoiding the places where he might encounter people who knew Mei Lin. But small towns have networks of gossip that spread like water finding cracks. And eventually someone from the western town mentioned to someone else that they'd seen that hermit Morrison buying rice and children's clothes. From there, it took less than a week for the news to reach the settlement closest to Mei Lin's cabin, and another 2 days for it to become common knowledge. Jake Morrison was staying with the Chinese widow. The hermit rancher, who hadn't been seen in town more than twice a year for over a decade, was living in the cabin of a foreign woman with 4 half-breed children. The scandal was delicious. Jake discovered the extent of it when he made the mistake of stopping at Brennan's general store for tobacco. He walked in and the conversation that had been buzzing around the stove died like someone had cut its throat. 8 men turned to stare at him. The silence was thick enough to cut. Jack Brennan, behind the counter, looked at him with barely concealed contempt. "Morrison, didn't expect to see you. Thought you'd found more accommodating company these days." Jake kept his face neutral, refusing to rise to the bait. "Need tobacco and nails, 3-inch. That's so. Building something. Or someone." A snicker from the men by the stove. Brennan smiled, enjoying himself. "Heard you've been spending considerable time down at the Chen place. Folks are wondering about that. Folks should mind their own business. When a white man takes up with a Chinese woman, it becomes everybody's business. Standards to maintain. Propriety." Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "I'm helping a widow with some repairs. Nothing improper about that." "Helping." Brennan drew the word out, making it sound dirty. "For 3 weeks now. That's a lot of helping, Morrison. What exactly are you fixing that takes 3 weeks?" "Whatever needs fixing." Jake put money on the counter. "The tobacco and nails, now." Brennan made no move to get the items. "You know what people are saying, don't you, about you and her? about what a man and woman do when they're alone in a cabin for 3 weeks. The other men were watching now with predatory interest, waiting to see if the hermit would break, would give them the confrontation they wanted. Jake could feel the violence rising in him, the same violence that had driven him to isolation 12 years ago, when he'd nearly killed a man for mentioning Sarah's name wrong. He took a breath, forced it down. People say a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. Maybe not. But truth is, Morrison, you're ruining what little reputation she had left. Chinese widow was bad enough. Chinese widow with a white man living in her cabin? That's something else entirely. Jake picked up his money, turned to leave without the tobacco or nails. He'd get them elsewhere. Anywhere else. You tell her, Brenton called after him, that she's not welcome in this town anymore, and neither are her children. We don't want them here. We don't want what they represent. You want to lie down with foreigners, that's your sin to carry. But don't bring it into our town. Jake stopped at the door. Every muscle in his body wanted to turn around, to cross those 10 feet, to put his fist through Jack Brennan's smug face. Instead, he kept walking, kept moving, got on his horse and rode away before he did something that couldn't be undone. But the damage was done. The following Sunday, Mei Lin made a decision that Jake argued against until he was hoarse. She was going to church. She was taking the children, and Jake would come with them. You don't understand what you're asking, Jake said, pacing the cabin floor. They're already talking. If we walk in there together, it'll confirm everything they're whispering. And if we hide, it confirms we have something to be ashamed of. Mei Lin was braiding Lily's hair, her hands steady despite the tension in her voice. I have done nothing wrong. You have done nothing wrong. We will go to church. We will hold our heads high, and we will show them that their cruelty does not control us. Mei Lin, think about the children, the things they'll hear, the way people will look at them. She turned to face him, and Jake saw steel in her eyes that he'd never seen before. My children already know how people look at them, already know the things people say. What they need to see is that their mother doesn't bow to hate, that she meets prejudice with dignity, that she refuses to be made invisible. Daniel, listening from the corner, spoke up. I want to go, Mama. I'm tired of hiding. Tommy nodded. Me too. We should be able to go to church if we want. Even Lily, quiet Lily, raised her hand. I want to go. Rose, understanding none of the subtext but always willing to join her siblings, piped up. I like church. They sing songs. Jake looked at the 5 of them, this family that wasn't his but felt increasingly like it was, and knew he'd lost the argument. Fine, we go, but I'm walking in with you, and if anyone says one word to these children, one word, I won't be responsible for what happens next. The walk from the wagon to the church door was the longest 100 yards of Jake's life. He could feel eyes on them from every direction. People standing in small groups outside the church, conversations stopping mid-sentence as they approached. The Morrison family and the Chen family walking together. Jake tall and solid on one side, Mei Lin graceful and defiant on the other, 4 children between them trying to be brave. They reached the steps. Pastor William Hart stood at the door, greeting parishioners as they entered. When he saw them approaching, his face went through several emotions in quick succession. Surprise, discomfort, calculation, and finally a kind of pained politeness. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Morrison, children, welcome. The words were correct, but the tone was wrong, strained. Pastor. Mei Lin nodded, not slowing. They walked through the door into the sanctuary. The sanctuary fell silent. Not the gradual quiet of conversation winding down, but the abrupt, shocked silence of seeing something so unexpected, so scandalous, that words simply ceased to exist. Every head turned, every eye fixed on them. The Chen widow and the hermit rancher, walking down the center aisle together like they had every right to be there. Mrs. Brennan gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Old Mrs. Cunningham clutched her pearls, literally clutched them. The miners in the back pew stared openly, judgment naked on their faces. Even the children in Sunday school, visible through the side door, stopped their activities to gawk. Mei Lin walked with her head high, her hand gentle on Rose's shoulder. Jake walked beside her, his presence solid and protective, his eyes daring anyone to speak. Daniel and Tommy flanked their younger sisters, trying to be shields. They found a pew near the front and sat down. Behind them, whispers started immediately, spreading like fire through dry grass. Shameless, living in sin right out in the open. Those poor children, corrupted by their mother's choices. He should know better, a white man lowering himself. Jake felt Mei Lin stiffen beside him, but she didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the words. Daniel's hands were clenched into fists in his lap. Tommy's eyes were wet, but he blinked the tears back. Lily stared straight ahead at the altar, her face carefully blank. Rose, confused by the tension, clutched her mother's hand. Pastor Hart took the pulpit and began his sermon. Ironically, the text was from Matthew. Love your neighbor as yourself. The hypocrisy was so thick, Jake could barely breathe. Hart preached charity and love, while his congregation sat in judgment of the women and children who'd needed charity most and received none. Halfway through the sermon, Rose had to use the outhouse. Mei Lin rose to take her, and Jake felt the shift in the room as people turned to watch them leave. He heard the whispers intensify, heard speculation about what they were really doing, where they were really going. When they returned 5 minutes later, Rose skipped ahead of her mother, innocently unaware. As she passed the pew where the Brennan family sat, Jack Brennan's son, a boy of maybe 15, stuck out his foot. Rose went down hard, her cry of pain cutting through the sermon. The sanctuary erupted into chaos. Mei Lin rushed to Rose, gathering her up. The girl's knee was bleeding through her stocking, her face shocked and frightened. Jake was already moving, his fury a living thing inside his chest. He grabbed the Brennan boy by the collar, lifted him half out of the pew. You apologize, right now. The boy, terrified but trying to bluster, sneered. Why should I apologize to some Chinese brat? Before Jake could respond, could do the violence that was screaming through every nerve, Pastor Hart was there, his hand on Jake's arm. Mr. Morrison, release the boy. This is God's house. Then maybe God should teach his people some decency. But Jake let go, stepping back. Jack Brennan was on his feet now, red-faced and aggressive. You put your hands on my son, Morrison, in church? Your son deliberately hurt a 6-year-old child in church. She's not a child. She's a Chinese mongrel, and she doesn't belong here any more than her whore mother does. The word hung in the air like poison. Mei Lin, still holding Rose, went very still. Daniel started to rise, but Tommy held him back. The entire congregation held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Jake Morrison, who'd spent 12 years avoiding conflict, who'd hidden from the world to escape his own capacity for violence, felt something snap inside him. Not toward Brennan, toward all of them. Every person in this sanctuary who'd watched a family starve rather than extend a hand. Every soul who'd preached love on Sunday and practiced hate every other day of the week. You want to call names? Fine, call me names too, because I'm staying with her. I've been staying with her for 3 weeks, and I'll keep staying with her as long as she needs me. You think that's improper? I think letting children go hungry while you sit on full pantries is improper. I think turning away your neighbors because they look different is improper. I think calling a decent, hardworking woman a whore because she accepted help you refused to give is about the most improper thing I can imagine. He turned, taking in the whole congregation. You're right that I don't belong here, but not because of her. Because of you. Because I'd rather spend my days with one Chinese widow who knows the meaning of courage than a whole church full of Christians who've forgotten what Christ actually taught. He held out his hand to Mei Lin. She took it, her fingers trembling slightly, but her head still high. Together they walked out of the sanctuary, 4 children following in their wake. Behind them, the whispers started immediately, but Jake didn't care. Didn't care what they said, what they thought, what stories they would tell. Outside, in the cold, clear air, Mei Lin finally let herself cry. Not sobs, just quiet tears running down her face. Jake stopped, turned to her. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I brought this on you. You didn't bring this. They did, with their small hearts and smaller minds. She wiped her eyes. But you were right. This was a mistake. You should go, Jake. Go back to your ranch, your isolation. I can't let you destroy your reputation for us. My reputation? I'm a hermit who talks to his dead wife. What reputation? You have business, cattle to sell, supplies to buy. If the whole territory thinks you're, she struggled for the word, involved with me, it will affect your livelihood. Jake looked at her tear-stained face and proud bearing, at the 4 children clustered around her, trying to be brave, and made a decision. I don't care. Jake! I don't care, he repeated more firmly. Let them talk. Let them judge. I've spent 12 years caring what people think, trying to avoid connection, hiding from anything that might hurt me. And what did it get me? An empty house and a half-lived life. He took both her hands in his. I'm done running, Mei Lin. Done pretending I don't care. Done protecting myself from everything, including the possibility of something good. You don't know what you're saying. The town will make your life difficult. The town can go to hell. Jake Morrison, but there was a hint of a smile in her voice. We'll figure it out. Together. If you want me to stay. If you'll have me around despite the trouble it causes. Mei Lin looked at him for a long moment. Behind her, the church door opened, and a few people emerged, staring at them, whispering. She ignored them completely, kept her eyes on Jake. Yes, she said quietly, stay. They rode home in silence, the children subdued in the wagon bed, Mei Lin and Jake on the bench lost in their own thoughts. The cabin had never looked more welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney, windows glowing warm in the fading afternoon light. That night, after the children were asleep, Mei Lin did something she hadn't done in 10 months. She opened the drawer where she kept Robert's things. His pocket watch, stopped at the moment of his death. His wedding ring, the small wooden box he'd carved for her when they were courting, and the shrine she'd hidden there. The incense and the small statue of Guanyin, the goddess of mercy. She lit the incense, let its smoke curl upward in the dim light. Robert, she whispered to the memory of the man she'd loved. I don't know what to do. There's a man here, a good man. He makes me feel safe, makes the children happy, makes me think about tomorrow instead of just surviving today. She paused, tears sliding down her cheeks. Is it too soon? Is it wrong? Would you forgive me for wanting this, for wanting him? The incense smoke rose and curled, forming patterns in the air. No answer came because the dead don't speak. But in her heart, Mei Lin heard Robert's voice as clearly as if he stood beside her, gentle Robert, who'd loved her enough to cross an ocean, to brave a new world, to build a life from nothing. Robert who'd made her promise in his final fevered hours to live, not just survive, live. I miss you, she told the smoke, the memory, the ghost of the life they'd shared. I'll always miss you. But I think he would want me to be happy. I think you'd like Jake. I think you'd approve. She didn't feel guilty saying it. That was the surprising part. She felt sad, yes, felt the loss of what had been, but also felt the tentative hope of what might be. It was possible, she realized, to honor the past while embracing the future. To love what you'd lost while opening yourself to loving again. Outside, Jake was having a similar conversation with a ghost. He'd walked to the ridge above the cabin, to the spot where he could see his ranch in the distance and the valley spread below. The moon was bright enough to see Sarah's grave on the far hill, a pale marker against the dark snow. I broke my promise, Sarah, he said to the night, to the distance, to the memory of a woman who'd been dead longer than she'd been his wife. I said I'd never love again, never have a family, but I think I'm falling in love with her, with them, with the whole impossible situation. The wind was cold on his face, carrying the scent of pine and snow. I'm scared, Sarah. Scared of losing them the way I lost you. Scared I'm betraying your memory. Scared I don't deserve this second chance. He paused, his breath misting white. But I'm also scared of going back to that empty house, back to eating alone and talking to photographs and pretending I'm alive when really I'm just waiting to die. He stood there a long time, remembering Sarah's laugh, her touch, the way she'd believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. And slowly in the cold and quiet, he came to understand something. Sarah would want him to live. The woman who'd taught him what love was wouldn't want that love to die with her. She'd want him to honor what they'd had by being brave enough to love again. I'll never forget you, he promised the ghost, the memory, the love that had shaped him. You'll always be part of me, but I need to let myself be part of them now. Need to let them be part of me. Is that all right, Sarah? Can I do that without dishonoring what we had? The wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of a coyote's howl, and in that sound, Jake heard something that might have been permission, might have been blessing, might have been just wind and wishful thinking, but he chose to believe it anyway. He walked back to the cabin with lighter steps, with something unclenching in his chest that had been tight for 12 years. Tomorrow he would face whatever consequences came from his speech at church. Tomorrow he would deal with town gossip and possible boycotts and all the complications of being a white man defending a Chinese woman in Montana Territory in 1884. But tonight, he was just grateful to be here, in this cabin, with this family, living again instead of just existing. He opened the door quietly, expecting everyone to be asleep. Instead, he found Mei Lin sitting at the table waiting for him. Her eyes were red from crying, but her face was calm. "I went to Robert's shrine," she said without preamble. "Asked him what to do. About you. About us." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. "What did he say?" "He said I should live. That's what he made me promise when he was dying. To live, not just survive, to find joy again, to not let grief make me small." She stood, crossed to where Jake stood, frozen in the doorway. "I think he'd like you, Jake Morrison. I think he'd be glad his family found someone strong enough to stand with them." Mei Lin, her name was prayer and plea and promise all at once. "I'm not saying I'm ready for everything, for whatever this could become, but I'm saying don't leave. Don't run because of what happened today. Don't let them drive you away." "I'm not going anywhere." Jake reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle on her smaller ones. "I told you, I'm done running." They stood like that, hands clasped, a foot of space between them that felt like both a chasm and nothing at all. This was new territory for both of them. Widower and widow, damaged and scared, but reaching for each other anyway. "We should sleep," Mei Lin said finally. "Tomorrow will be difficult. Tomorrow we'll be fine. We'll face it together." She smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look younger, less burdened. Together. But tomorrow brought something neither of them anticipated. Tomorrow brought crisis that would test not just their resolve, but their very hearts. The morning dawned gray and cold, with the kind of stillness that presaged more snow. Jake was outside splitting wood when he heard the scream, high and terrified and unmistakably Mei Lin's voice. He dropped the axe and ran. Inside the cabin, chaos. Mei Lin bent over Lily's bed, her face white with terror. The other children clustered around, frightened and confused. And Lily, sweet, quiet Lily, lay still and burning with fever, her skin so hot Jake could feel the heat radiating from 2 feet away. "She won't wake up," Mei Lin sobbed. "She's burning up, and she won't wake up." "Jake, these were the symptoms. This is how Robert started. The fever, the sleeping, this is how it started before the pneumonia took him." Jake knelt beside the bed, put his hand on Lily's forehead. Mei Lin was right. The fever was dangerous, the kind that could kill if it wasn't brought down. And the child was too still, her breathing too shallow. "We need Doc Fletcher," Jake said. "Now." "The town. After yesterday, they won't." "They will. Doc's a good man. He'll come." Jake was already moving, grabbing his coat. "I'll bring him back. You keep her cool. Water on the cloth. Keep wiping her down. Don't let the fever spike higher." "Jake!" Mei Lin's voice stopped him at the door. Her face was raw with fear, with the memory of watching her husband die from the same symptoms. "Don't let her die. Please, I can't lose another. I can't." Jake crossed back to her, pulled her against him hard and fast. "I won't let her die. I promise you, I won't let her die." It was a promise he had no right to make, a promise no man could guarantee. But he made it anyway, and then he was gone, running for his horse, riding hard for town and the doctor who might be their only hope. The ride was a blur of snow and fear and prayer. Jake Morrison, who hadn't prayed in 12 years, found himself bargaining with a gun he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Promising anything, everything, if only Lily would be all right. If only this family that had come to mean so much wouldn't lose another piece of itself to a Montana winter's cruelty. He found Doc Fletcher at his office, an old man who'd seen too much death but still fought it anyway. "It's the Chen girl," Jake said without preamble. "Lily, high fever, won't wake. Same symptoms her father had before the pneumonia." Doc grabbed his bag without hesitation. "How long has she been like this?" "Found her this morning, but Mei Lin thinks the fever started in the night." They rode back together, Doc on his old mare, Jake pushing his horse harder than he should. When they reached the cabin, Mei Lin met them at the door, her face streaked with tears. "She's worse. The fever's higher. She's starting to shake." Doc pushed past her. All business now. Jake watched him examine Lily, saw the concern deepen in the old man's eyes. Finally, Doc straightened, his expression grim. It's bad. Could be pneumonia, could be influenza. Either way, the next 48 hours will tell the story. She needs constant care, cool cloths to keep the fever down, fluids if we can get her to swallow, and prayer. In my experience, prayer doesn't hurt. What are her chances? Jake asked the question Mei Lin couldn't. Doc looked at him, at her, at the three children huddled in the corner, terrified of losing another sibling. Honestly, 50-50. She's young, that's in her favor. But she's also been half-starved most of the winter, which weakens resistance. Could go either way. Mei Lin made a sound like something breaking. Jake caught her before she fell, held her up. "We'll fight it," he said. "Together. We'll fight it and we'll win." Doc left medicine, left instructions, left them to their vigil. Jake sent Daniel and Tommy to his ranch to feed the livestock, to bring back more supplies, to give them something to do besides watch their sister suffer. Rose, too young to be sent away, but too young to fully understand, clung to Mei Lin's skirts and cried. The hours blurred together. Day became night, became day again. Jake and Mei Lin took shifts, one sleeping while the other kept watch, cooling Lily's burning skin, dripping water between her cracked lips, praying in their own ways to their own gods. On the second night, the worst night, when the fever spiked so high Lily started convulsing, Jake held Mei Lin while she screamed her grief and rage at a god who would take another child from her. And Mei Lin held Jake while he whispered promises to Sarah's memory that if she had any pull with whatever heaven existed, now was the time to use it. Rose fell asleep in Jake's lap, exhausted from crying. He held her with one arm while changing the cloth on Lily's forehead with the other. This man who'd sworn he'd never have children, never care this deeply, never put himself in a position to lose again. "I can't do this," Mei Lin whispered at some point deep in that endless night. "I can't watch another person I love die, Jake. I don't have the strength." "Yes, you do. You're the strongest person I know." "I'm not strong. I'm breaking. Can't you see? I'm breaking apart." Jake pulled her close. This woman who'd held her family together through starvation and grief and prejudice. "Then break. I've got you. We'll hold each other up until we're strong enough to stand alone again." They sat like that, Lily between them, Rose asleep in Jake's arms, the fire crackling low. Two people who'd been alone too long, clinging to each other in the face of a loss that might destroy them both. And then in the darkest hour before dawn, Lily stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, fever bright but aware. "Mama?" she whispered. Mei Lin was there instantly, touching her daughter's face, her forehead, her cheeks. The fever was lower, not broken, but lower. "I'm here, precious. Mama's here." I had scary dreams. "I know, but you're safe now. You're safe." Lily's eyes found Jake. "Mr. Jake stayed?" "I stayed." His voice was rough with emotion. "I promised I would, remember? I don't break my promises." The little girl smiled, a ghost of her usual brightness, then closed her eyes and slipped into real sleep. Not the fever sleep of before, but genuine rest, healing rest. Jake and Mei Lin looked at each other across the sleeping child. No words were necessary. They'd fought together, suffered together, held each other through the darkest hours. And they'd won. Mei Lin reached across Lily's still form and took Jake's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying, for fighting with me, for keeping your promise. I'll always keep my promises to you." Jake squeezed her hand, feeling the truth of it settle deep in his bones. "Always, Mei Lin." She smiled through her tears, and in that smile Jake saw his future. Saw mornings waking up to this face, evenings spent by this fire, years of fighting and struggling and living together. Saw the family he'd thought he'd never have, found in the most unexpected place. "I love you," he said, the words escaping before he could think better of them. "I know it's too soon. I know it's complicated, but I need you to know. I love you and I love these children. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that." Mei Lin's eyes widened, tears spilling over. For a moment she didn't speak, and Jake's heart thundered against his ribs. Terrified he'd ruined everything, said too much too fast. Then she leaned forward, across the sleeping child between them, and kissed him, soft and brief and tasting of salt tears and hope. When she pulled back, her eyes were luminous in the firelight. "I love you too, Jake Morrison, and it terrifies me, but I love you anyway." They stayed like that as dawn broke over Montana, As Lily's fever continued to drop, as Rose woke and demanded breakfast, as the world outside kept turning indifferent to the small miracle happening inside one cabin. Stayed together, holding hands across the sleeping child they'd saved together, two broken people finding wholeness in each other. The thawing had begun in earnest now, not just of hearts frozen by grief, but of lives frozen by fear. And though challenges lay ahead, though the town's judgment hadn't vanished and winter wasn't over yet, they would face it all together. No longer running, no longer hiding, just living, finally truly living again. Lily's recovery took a week, 7 days during which Jake stayed at the cabin without pretense or excuse simply because leaving was unthinkable. 7 days of watching color return to the little girl's cheeks, of hearing her laugh again, of witnessing the fierce joy in Mei Lin's eyes every time her daughter asked for food or complained about being bored or did any of the wonderfully ordinary things healthy children do. On the 8th day, when Lily was well enough to sit up and demand her drawing materials, Jake found himself alone with Mei Lin on the porch as twilight painted the Montana sky in shades of purple and gold. The children were inside, their voices a gentle murmur through the cabin walls. Daniel reading to his sisters, Tommy making shadow puppets on the wall, ordinary evening sounds that felt precious beyond measure. Mei Lin stood with her arms wrapped around herself against the February cold, watching the last light fade from the western hills. Jake stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, far enough that propriety was maintained. Almost maintained. "I've been thinking," Jake said, his breath misting white in the freezing air, "about what happens next, about where we go from here." Mei Lin didn't look at him, kept her eyes on the horizon. "You've stayed longer than you should have already. Your ranch needs you, your cattle need tending. Daniel's been handling it. Boy's got a good head for livestock, better than I did at his age. Even so, people will talk more if you stay. Will say things that will make life harder for all of us. People are already talking." Jake turned to face her, studied her profile against the dying light. The delicate line of her jaw, the strength in her bearing, the way she held herself like royalty despite having nothing. "Question is, do we care what they say? Or do we decide for ourselves what this is, what we want it to be?" Now Mei Lin did look at him, her dark eyes searching his face for answers he hoped he could provide. "What do you want it to be, Jake Morrison?" He'd rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times over the past week, planned what he would say, how he would say it, the right words to convince her that what he felt was real and lasting and worth the risk. But standing here with her eyes on his and the truth demanding to be spoken, all the practiced speeches fled like birds, startled into flight. "I want to court you properly. Want to ask your permission to come calling, to bring you flowers and candy like young men do. Want to sit in your parlor under the watchful eyes of a chaperone and make polite conversation about the weather." He smiled, sad and wry. "But we don't have time for proper, do we? We're not young. We've both been married, both buried spouses we loved. We know what it costs to love someone, know what it means when that someone is taken away. Then why risk it again?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but Jake heard the fear in it, the longing, the hope she was afraid to acknowledge. "Because the alternative is spending the rest of my life in that empty house, talking to ghosts, pretending I'm alive when really I'm just waiting to die. Because these past weeks with you, with your children, have reminded me what it feels like to actually live, to wake up with purpose, to go to sleep grateful instead of numb." Jake took a breath, let it out slowly. "Because I've spent 12 years protecting myself from pain, and all I've protected is an empty shell. I don't want to be a shell anymore, Mei Lin. I want to be a man again. A husband. A father. I want to be alive." Mei Lin's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm not easy, Jake. I have 4 children who need more than I can give them. I'm foreign in a place that hates foreigners. I come with complications that will make your life harder in every possible way. You'll lose business, lose friends, lose standing in the community. I'm 52 years old, set in my ways, haunted by memories I can't shake. I talk to my dead wife's grave. I've spent 12 years hiding from the world because I couldn't bear the thought of losing anyone else." Jake took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle on hers. "I'd say we're about evenly matched in the complications department." A laugh escaped her, half sob, half genuine amusement. "Maybe damaged people fit together better. Maybe we understand each other's broken places better than whole people ever could. Maybe. Jake squeezed her hand, felt the delicate bones beneath the work-roughened skin. I love you, Mei Lin. I know I already said it in the middle of that crisis with Lily, but I need you to hear it again when we're calm and clear-headed. I love you. I love your strength and your dignity and the way you've held your family together when most people would have crumbled. I love how you teach your children to stand tall, how you refuse to be made small by people's cruelty. I love the way you look at the world, finding beauty in hard places. I love you, and I want to spend whatever years I have left proving it. Mei Lin's tears spilled over now, tracking down her cheeks in the fading light. I love you too, and it terrifies me because I know what it means to lose someone I love. Know that the more I let myself care, the more it will destroy me if something happens to you. Then we'll be terrified together, and we'll live anyway despite the fear, because the alternative is no life at all. She turned fully to face him, both her hands in his now. Robert was a good man. I loved him deeply. When he died, I thought that part of my life was over, thought I'd raise our children and grow old alone, and that would be enough. That honoring him meant never loving anyone else. And now? Now I think maybe there's room for both. Room to honor what I had with him while building something new with you. Room to remember him while loving you. Room to be grateful for what was while embracing what could be. She paused, searching his face. Does that make sense? Am I betraying him by loving you? You're honoring him by living, by choosing joy over grief, hope over despair, love over loneliness. That's not betrayal. That's the bravest thing a person can do. What about Sarah? Are you betraying her? Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the woman who'd been gone longer than she'd been his wife, but who'd shaped him in ways that would never fade. Sarah will always be part of me. The way I see the world, the way I treat people, the things I value. She made me a better man. But that doesn't mean there's not room for you too. For this. For us. They stood like that as full dark settled over the valley, hands clasped, a conversation happening in the silence that words couldn't quite capture. Two people damaged by loss, scared of loving again, but reaching for each other anyway because the alternative was a living death, and they'd both had enough of dying. Then Mei Lin rose on her toes and kissed him. Not the brief, crisis-driven kiss of a week ago, but something slower, deeper, full of promise and possibility, and the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, they could have this, could have each other, could build a life from the ruins of the lives they'd lost. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless in the cold, Jake rested his forehead against hers. We should probably go inside before we freeze to death out here. Probably. But neither of them moved, unwilling to break the moment. The magic of this quiet evening and the future suddenly spread before them like a gift they hadn't known they could still receive. Inside, Rose's voice called out, high and knowing. Mama? Mr. Jake? Are you kissing out there? Mei Lin laughed, the sound bright and free and younger than Jake had ever heard it. No, precious. We're just talking. That's what Papa used to say when you were kissing. I'm not a baby, you know. Jake grinned, saw his own amusement reflected in Mei Lin's eyes. Smart girl. Too smart. But Mei Lin was smiling as they went inside, as four children looked up with knowing expressions, as the cabin wrapped them in warmth and light in the complicated, beautiful mess of family. The attacks, when they came, were both more subtle and more devastating than simple violence would have been. It started with Jack Brennan refusing to sell Jake's supplies. Jake arrived at the general store on a gray February morning, list in hand, only to be met with a handwritten sign tacked to the door. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. Inside, Brennan stood behind his counter, arms crossed, face hard as granite. The store was full of goods Jake needed. Flour, salt, sugar, nails, rope. All the necessities of frontier life, all suddenly unavailable. Can't help you, Morrison, store policy. Since when? Since I decided I don't want to do business with men who've forgotten their place. Their kind. Brennan's eyes were cold, his voice colder. You want to live like a Chinaman, buy your goods from Chinamen, if you can find any willing to deal with you. Jake felt the anger rise hot and fast, but forced it down. Losing his temper would only give Brennan what he wanted, would prove whatever ugly theory the man had about people who consorted with foreigners. Fine, I'll take my business elsewhere. You do that. And you tell that Chinese woman of yours she's not welcome here either. Not her, not those mongrel children of hers. This is a white man's store for white men's business. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Every muscle in his body wanted to cross that counter, to grab Brennan by his collar and make him take back those words. But violence would only hurt Mei Lin, would only confirm the town's worst suspicions about him. Those children have names. Use them, or don't speak about them at all. I'll speak how I please in my own store. Now get out before I have the marshal remove you for trespassing. Jake left, jaw tight, fury coiling in his gut like a living thing. But he didn't give Brennan the satisfaction of an outburst. Instead, he rode 40 miles to the next settlement, a hard day's journey there and back, and bought supplies in bulk. Enough to last 2 months. Enough that he wouldn't have to give Brennan another cent of his money or another moment of his time. When he returned to the cabin late that evening, arms loaded with sacks and bundles, Mei Lin met him at the door. One look at his face told her something had happened. What is it? Brennan's refusing to sell to me. Or to you. Says we're not welcome in his store. Her face went carefully blank. The expression Jake was learning meant she was hiding hurt behind walls of pride. I see. But I found another store, better prices actually. We'll buy there from now on. He set down the supplies, turned to face her. And I brought extra. Figured we might as well combine households, at least for supplies. Doesn't make sense to buy things separately when we're eating together most days anyway. Jake, that's your money, your supplies. Our supplies. We're in this together, remember? What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine. That's what family does. Something in her face softened. Together. Together. The social ostracism was harder to bear because it was so complete, so coordinated, so clearly organized. 2 weeks after Brennan's ban, Pastor William Hart appeared at the cabin, hat literally in hand, looking more uncomfortable than Jake had ever seen a man look. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Morrison, might I have a word? They invited him in, offered coffee. He declined with a nervous wave of his hand, waited for him to find the courage to say whatever he'd come to say. The children, sensing adult business, retreated to the loft, their footsteps quiet overhead. I've been asked by the church council to speak with you about Sunday services. Hart couldn't quite meet their eyes, focused instead on his hands twisting his hat. There's been some concern about disruption to worship, about the example being set for the younger congregants. What kind of disruption? Jake kept his voice level, neutral, giving Hart no reason to retreat behind defensiveness. Your presence together, it causes talk, distraction. People can't focus on the sermon when they're focused on judging the situation. And I know that's wrong. I know they should be listening to God's word. But human nature being what it is, then perhaps you should preach a sermon about not judging, Mei Lin said quietly, about removing the log from one's own eye before pointing out the speck in another's. Hart flushed red. Mrs. Chen, I understand this is difficult, but the church is a community, and communities have standards, expectations. When those aren't met, it creates discord, division. My job is to maintain unity among the flock. What are you saying, a pastor? Jake already knew, but wanted to make the man say it out loud, wanted him to own the cruelty of what he was asking. I'm asking if perhaps you might consider worshiping at home for a while, just until things settle down, until people have time to adjust to the situation. Adjust to what? To me helping a widow and her children? To us being friends? What exactly needs adjusting? You know what people think, Mr. Morrison, what they assume about a man and woman spending so much time together unchaperoned, living under the same roof, essentially, given how often you are here. It looks improper. It looks like sin, even if it isn't. People think wrong. Jake stood, his size suddenly feeling like a weapon in the small cabin. And if they're spending their time in church thinking wrong thoughts instead of listening to sermons about love and charity, that sounds like their problem, not ours. Please understand, I'm not saying I agree with them. Personally, I think you've shown admirable charity. But as a leader, I have to think about the whole congregation, about keeping the peace. Mei Lin stood too, her dignity a palpable force in the room. We will continue to attend services, Pastor Hart. We will sit where we please and worship as we see fit. If that causes disruption, perhaps you should examine why Christian people are more concerned with judging their neighbors than loving them. Perhaps you should ask yourself if keeping the peace is worth sacrificing what's right. Hart left looking defeated and miserable, a man caught between his conscience and his congregation, choosing the easier path. The next Sunday, Jake and Mei Lin arrived with all four children, heads high, and walked to the back pew. Let themselves be seated where they could be stared at, whispered about, judged by people who'd never offered them a single kindness. And they sat through the entire service with quiet grace, teaching their children through example that dignity could not be taken, only surrendered. But it was the children who paid the highest price for their parents' choices. Daniel came home from school on a Wednesday in late February, his face carefully blank in the way that meant he was hiding something. Mei Lin spotted it immediately, the tightness around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way he wouldn't quite look at her. What happened? Nothing, Mama. Daniel Chen, I know your face better than my own. What happened? The boy's composure cracked like ice under pressure. Mrs. Henderson said, I can't come to school anymore. Said enrollment policies have changed. When I asked what policies, she said policies that don't include my kind. When I told her my father paid taxes, that I have as much right to education as anyone, she said times change and I should go home and not come back. Mei Lin's face went white. Jake, who'd been repairing a chair leg in the corner, stood slowly, the wood forgotten in his hands. She said that? Those exact words? Daniel nodded, looking young and hurt in a way that made Jake want to ride to that school and tear down every wall. I told her I was learning more than half the kids in class, that I'd done nothing wrong. She said it wasn't about wrong, it was about appropriate, that it wasn't appropriate for me to be there anymore. Jake looked at Mei Lin, saw his own fury reflected in her eyes, but also calculation, strategy, the mind of a woman who'd learned to fight battles she couldn't win with force. They could fight this, could make a formal complaint, could try to force the issue through legal channels. But fighting would take time and energy and money they didn't have. And in the end, Daniel would still be sitting in a classroom with a teacher who didn't want him there, and children whose parents had taught them hate. Then we'll teach you at home, Mei Lin said firmly. I can teach you reading and writing and mathematics. Mr. Jake can teach you practical skills. You'll learn more with us than you ever would with Mrs. Henderson. But Mama, I like school. I liked learning new things. I was good at it. I was the best speller in class, and Mrs. Henderson said I had a gift for numbers. His voice broke. Why do they get to take that away from me? Because they're small people with small hearts, Jake said, kneeling in front of the boy. Because they're afraid of anyone different, anyone who might show them up, anyone who challenges their comfortable little world. But Daniel, listen to me. Education isn't about buildings or teachers or who gets to sit in which classroom. Education is about hunger for knowledge, about refusing to be satisfied with not knowing. You've got that hunger. I see it in you. Nobody can take that away unless you let them. It's not fair. No, it's not. And I'm sorry that the world is teaching you this lesson so young, but it's a lesson you need to learn. Life isn't fair. People aren't always good. But you get to choose who you become in response to that unfairness. You can become bitter or you can become better. Your choice, son. Tommy's incident was more direct, more violent, a physical manifestation of the town's hostility. He came home with a black eye swelling shut, split lip bleeding down his chin, knuckles raw and scraped from fighting. Before Mei Lin could even ask, words tumbled out of him in a rush. Bobby Henderson said you were a whore, Mama. Said you were selling yourself to Mr. Jake like Chinese women do in San Francisco. Said everyone knows what you are, what we are. I hit him. I know I'm not supposed to fight, but I hit him and I'd do it again even if they beat me bloody. Jake knelt in front of the 10-year-old, examined the damage with gentle hands. Did you win? Tommy blinked, surprised by the question. What? The fight, did you win? I got a few good hits in before his brothers pulled me off. Gave him a bloody nose at least. Good. Fighting isn't always wrong, son. Defending your mother's honor, that's about as right as fighting gets. Just make sure it's worth the bruises. Make sure you're fighting for something that matters, not just to prove you can. Jake, Mei Lin protested, but there was no real heat in it. You can't encourage him to fight. I'm not encouraging him to pick fights. I'm telling him that some things are worth fighting for. Family honor is one of them. Protecting the people you love is one of them. Standing up to bullies who think they can say anything without consequences, that's one of them too. He ruffled Tommy's hair gently, careful of the bruises. But next time, try to get in more hits before they pull you off. and aim for the soft parts. Nose, gut, groin, make it count. Despite everything, despite the pain, Tommy grinned. A fierce, proud grin that said he understood, that he'd fight again if he had to, and he'd fight better. Lily's heartbreak was quieter but no less painful. She'd submitted her artwork to the county fair, 5 careful drawings she'd worked on for months. Studies of birds and flowers in the Montana landscape, rendered with a skill that belied her 8 years. She'd been so proud of them, had talked of nothing else for weeks, had dreamed of seeing them displayed alongside other children's work. When the winners were announced, and her name wasn't among them, she'd been disappointed but philosophical. Not everyone could win. That was the nature of competition. But when Jake went to collect her submissions, he found them in the trash behind the exhibition hall. Not lost, not misplaced, deliberately discarded. Thrown away like garbage because a Chinese child's art wasn't worth displaying alongside white children's work. He brought them home, smoothed out the wrinkles and creases, brushed off the dirt, and presented them to Lily with a solemnity usually reserved for military medals or sacred relics. These are beautiful. They're going on our wall where everyone can see them. Those fair judges don't know art when they see it, but I do, and I say these are masterpieces. Lily cried, but not from sadness. From the fierce love in Jake's eyes, from being seen and valued when the world tried to make her invisible, from having someone who believed in her talent, even when official judgment said she had none. Rose's incident was perhaps the cruelest because it involved another child's birthday party, because it struck at the innocent heart of a 6-year-old who didn't understand prejudice, who only knew that she'd been invited and then uninvited for reasons that made no sense. An invitation had been delivered by the birthday girl herself, little Molly Peterson, who'd played with Rose after church services and seemed genuinely fond of her. The invitation was hand-drawn, decorated with flowers and hearts, an artifact of childhood friendship that Rose treasured like gold. For days, Rose talked of nothing else. What she would wear, what game they might play, what gifts she would bring. She drew a picture as a present, her best work, a portrait of Molly with flowers in her hair. She practiced her party manners until Mei Lin was satisfied she'd do credit to the family. Then 2 days before the party, Rose came home holding a note. The mother's handwriting was apologetic but firm. Upon reflection, we feel it's best if Rose doesn't attend. We hope you understand, it's nothing personal. Nothing personal, as if rejecting a child could ever be anything but personal. Rose didn't understand. Her 6-year-old mind couldn't grasp the concept of prejudice disguised as propriety. Why can't I go, Mama? Did I do something wrong? I'll be good, I promise. I'll be so good they won't even know I'm there. Mei Lin held her daughter while she sobbed, while innocence cracked against the reality of a world that would judge her for things she couldn't control, while childhood died a little in the face of adult cruelty. And Jake, watching from the doorway, felt something inside him harden into steel. After 6 weeks of this siege, this slow grinding down by 1,000 small cruelties and a handful of small kindnesses, Jake made a decision. He and Mei Lin were sitting on the porch, their evening ritual now, watching the late winter sun set over the mountains. Marry me. Mei Lin turned to him, eyes wide, breath catching. What? Marry me, not someday, not when things settle down, not when the town accepts us. Now, next week, as soon as we can arrange it. Jake, we've talked about this, about waiting until the situation improves, until what? Until the town accepts us? They never will. Until it's easier? It's never going to be easy. Until we've somehow earned the right to be happy? We've earned it, Mei Lin. We've paid for it in suffering and strength and refusing to bow. He took both her hands in his. I don't want to wait anymore. Don't want to pretend this is anything other than what it is. I love you. You love me. We're already living as a family in every way that matters. Let's make it official. Let's stand before God and the law and say this is real, this matters, this is forever. Mei Lin's eyes were wet with tears that caught the fading light. The scandal. It will be enormous. People already talk. If we marry, it will confirm everything they've said, everything they believe about us. Let it be enormous. Let it confirm everything. I'm done caring what they think. Done giving them power over our lives. Done hiding and hedging and pretending we're something less than what we are. The children. Jake, think about the children. This will make their lives even harder. I am thinking about the children. I'm thinking they need stability. They need to know that I'm not going anywhere. that I'm committed to them and to you in every possible way. I'm thinking they need the legal protection that comes with me being their stepfather. I'm thinking that if something happened to you, Mei Lin, those children would have no one. But if we're married, they'd have me. Legally, permanently, irrevocably me. She hadn't thought of that. He could see it in her face. The realization that marriage wasn't just about love or scandal or what people thought. It was about protection, about ensuring that if the worst happened, if consumption or childbirth or any of 100 frontier dangers took her, her children would not be orphaned in a hostile land. Where would we marry? No church will have us. No pastor will perform the ceremony. Justice of the Peace, county seat, 60 miles west. Simple ceremony, legal and binding, and recognized by law. We can take the children, make it a family occasion. No fuss, no spectacle, just us and a judge and the promises we make to each other. Mei Lin was quiet for a long time, watching the last light fade from the sky, feeling the weight of this decision. Robert and I married in San Francisco, big ceremony, both families there. Traditional Chinese wedding with all the customs and rituals, red dress, tea ceremony, the whole celebration. It was beautiful. I'm not trying to replace that. I'm not trying to compete with that memory. I know you're not. She squeezed his hands. Sarah was your first love. This is different. We're different, and maybe that's all right. Maybe we can honor what we had while embracing what we have now. Maybe loving you doesn't betray Robert, and loving me doesn't betray Sarah. Maybe we're allowed to be happy again, even though we've lost so much. So is that a yes? She smiled through her tears, radiant in the twilight. That's a yes, Jake Morrison. I'll marry you. But before they could marry, before they could stand before a judge and make it legal, Jake insisted on doing something he considered essential. Something that terrified him but felt necessary in a way he couldn't fully articulate. He needed the children's blessing. He waited until they were all together, a quiet evening after supper when the day's work was done and the fire burned warm. He stood before them, these 4 children who'd come to mean everything, and his hands shook slightly as he prepared to speak. Then he knelt, got down on his knees on the rough cabin floor and looked up at them. I'm asking your mother to marry me, he began, his voice rough with emotion. But before she gives me a final answer, before we make any plans, I need to ask you something. I need your permission. Our permission? Daniel's eyes were wide with understanding and something that looked like hope. You had a father, a good father who loved you and worked hard for you and died trying to help a neighbor. Robert Chen was a better man than most, and he deserves to be remembered with honor. Jake looked at each of them in turn. I can never replace him. Don't want to replace him. Don't even want to try. He'll always be your pa, always be part of who you are. Your first father, the one who gave you life and taught you how to be good people. He swallowed hard, searching for the right words. But I want to be a father to you too. A different kind of father, but still a father. I want to protect you and teach you and love you the way a father should. I want to be there for every milestone, every triumph, every heartbreak. I want to walk Lily down the aisle someday when she marries. I want to teach Tommy to break a horse and help Daniel build his first house and watch Rose grow into a remarkable woman. I want to be there when you need guidance, when you need comfort, when you just need someone to believe in you. His voice broke. He cleared his throat, pushed on. But I need to know you want that too, that you'll let me in, that you'll call me Papa or Pa or Dad or even just Jake, but that you'll let me love you as my own, that you'll accept me as family, not just as the man who happens to be marrying your mother. So I'm kneeling here and asking, will you let me be your father? Silence. 4 children looking at each other, at their mother standing silent and crying in the corner, at this big man kneeling before them with his heart in his hands and hope naked on his weathered face. Then Daniel spoke, his 13-year-old voice cracking with emotion, with grief and relief and something that sounded like forgiveness. When Pa died, his last words to me were about being the man of the house, about taking care of Mama and the little ones, about being strong and brave and making him proud. The boy's voice shook. I tried so hard, Mr. Jake. I got up every morning and I tried to do what a man does. I looked for work. I tried to keep food on the table. I tried to keep us warm and safe and together, but I couldn't do it. I was 13 and I couldn't do it. The garden died, the money ran out, Mama got thinner and thinner, and I couldn't stop it. I failed at everything Pa asked me to do. Daniel, no! Mei Lin started, moving toward him, but Daniel held up a hand. Let me finish, Mama, please. He turned back to Jake, tears streaming down his face. Then you came. Christmas morning, like an answer to prayers I didn't even know how to pray anymore. And you did all the things I couldn't. You kept us fed and warm and safe. You stood up to the town when I was too scared. You taught me what being a man really means. Not doing everything alone, not never asking for help, but standing with your family. Fighting the battles that matter. Protecting the people you love, even when it costs you everything. The boy moved to kneel in front of Jake, eye to eye now. I'd be honored to call you Pa, honored to learn from you, honored to have you as my father. And maybe now I can stop trying to be a man and just be a son again. Maybe I can be 13 instead of 30. Maybe I can learn from you instead of trying to figure everything out on my own. Jake pulled the boy into a fierce embrace, both of them crying now, 12 years of Jake's grief and 10 months of Daniel's burden flowing out in shared tears. You didn't fail, son. You did something harder than any man should have to do. You carried weight that wasn't yours to carry, and you carried it with honor. Now let me carry it. Let me be the man. You just be my boy. Tommy was next, launching himself at Jake with the enthusiasm of a 10-year-old who'd never learned to hide his feelings. He crashed into both Jake and Daniel, wrapping his arms around them both. You taught me how to use a hammer without smashing my thumb more than twice. You taught me how to ride a horse without falling off more than 6 times. You taught me how to stand up to Bobby Henderson and his brothers, even though they're bigger than me. You're already my pa, Mr. Jake. You've been my pa since Christmas morning. We've just been waiting for you to make it official and for us to be brave enough to say it out loud. Lily approached more quietly, her 8-year-old wisdom showing in the careful way she studied Jake's face before speaking. She didn't throw herself at him like Tommy. Instead, she placed her small hand in his large one, the gesture deliberate and meaningful. You see me, she said simply. You look at my drawings and you really see them. You understand what I'm trying to say even when I can't find the words. You see the bird's question and the flower's loneliness and the mountain's strength. That's what fathers do. They see their children for who they really are, not just who they're supposed to be. You see me, Mr. Jake, and I want you to be my father because I think you'll keep seeing me even when I grow up and change and become someone different than who I am now. Jake gathered her close, this thoughtful child who understood more than most adults about what mattered. I'll always see you, Lily girl. Always. Rose, last and littlest, climbed into the pile of people with the fearlessness of a 6-year-old who knew she was loved. She scrambled up until she could cup Jake's weathered face in her tiny hands, making him look directly at her. You're my Papa Jake. You've always been my Papa Jake. From the very first day when you brought us Christmas and you carried me inside when I was hungry and you made everything warm again. You're the Papa who stayed when he didn't have to, who fixed things and taught us things and loved Mama when she was sad. You're my Papa and I love you and that's all that matters. She kissed his forehead with loud smacking sound, then settled into his lap like she belonged there. Which she did. Which they all did. Jake held all 4 of them, these children who were choosing him just as much as he was choosing them, and felt something heal in him that he thought was permanently broken. Sarah's son had died before drawing breath, but here were 4 children very much alive, very much his, very much a family born not of blood, but of choice and love and the courage to try again. The wedding was planned for the following week, but Jake and Mei Lin made one more decision. They would tell the town first. Not ask permission, not seek approval, simply inform them, as was their right as free adults making a free choice about their own lives. The town council met every other Thursday in the schoolhouse, conducting the business of governance that kept their small settlement functioning. Jake requested time to speak at the end of their regular meeting, citing personal business that affected the community at large. The council, curious despite themselves, granted him 10 minutes. When Jake and Mei Lin walked into that schoolhouse together on a cold Thursday evening, the room went silent. 15 men, the town's leaders and businessmen and self-appointed moral authorities, stopped their conversations mid-sentence to stare. Shock, disgust, curiosity, judgment played across their faces like cards being dealt. Jake stood before them, Mei Lin at his side, and felt a calm descend over him like armor. This was it. This was the moment when they would either stand for themselves or bow to pressure. There would be no going back from this. Gentlemen, I'll keep this brief. I'm here to inform you that I intend to marry Mei Lin Chen next Saturday. We'll wed at the county seat before a justice of the peace. This is not a request for permission or approval. This is simply a courtesy to let you know before it becomes common knowledge through other channels. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the wooden floor. Then Pastor William Hart stood, his face flushed with discomfort and disapproval. Mr. Morrison, surely you realize the impropriety of such a match. Mrs. Chen is Chinese, foreign. While the law may technically permit such unions, they go against the natural order of things, against God's plan for the races to remain separate and distinct. Jake cut him off, his voice sharp as broken glass. Don't you dare invoke God's plan when you've forgotten God's most basic commandment. Love thy neighbor, Pastor. Remember that one? Or does it only apply when the neighbor looks like you, talks like you, comes from where you come from? This is not about love, Mr. Morrison. This is about maintaining community standards, about protecting the character of our town. Community standards? Your standards let children starve while you sat on full pantries. Your standards turned a widow away from church because helping her might inconvenience you. Your standards kicked a 13-year-old out of school for having the wrong parents. Your standards broke a 6-year-old's heart over a birthday party invitation. Jake's voice rose, not in anger but in passion, in a conviction that would not be denied. You want to talk about protecting the character of this town? Look around, Pastor. Look at what your standards have created. Look at the cruelty you have sanctioned in the name of propriety. He turned, addressing the whole council now. I know Mei Lin Chen. I know her courage, her strength, her dignity in the face of treatment that would break most people. I know she's faced loss and hunger and hate and never once bowed. I know she's raised 4 remarkable children who have more character in their little fingers than most people in this room have in their whole bodies. And if you can't see her worth, that's your failure, not hers. Jack Brennan stood now, his face ugly with rage, his fist clenched on the table. You're choosing them over your own kind, Morrison, over your own people, over everything decent people stand for. My own kind? Jake turned to face him fully, all 6 feet 2 inches of him radiating quiet power. You mean people who let their neighbors freeze rather than share firewood? People who kick children out of school for being born to the wrong parents? People who break a little girl's heart by rescinding birthday invitations because she has the wrong color skin? People who throw an 8-year-old's artwork in the trash rather than display it alongside white children's drawings? If that's my kind, Brennan, then yes, I choose them over you. I choose decency over hate. I choose courage over cowardice. I choose love over prejudice. I choose them. The room erupted, men shouting, some in support but most in opposition, accusations flying, Bible verses quoted out of context, threats veiled and open. Jake stood his ground, Mei Lin beside him, both of them refusing to be shouted down or shamed into retreat. Then Mei Lin spoke, her voice cutting through the chaos like a bell through fog. The room fell silent again, shocked that the Chinese widow, the foreign woman, would dare speak in this setting to these men with such authority. I came to this country with my husband 17 years ago. We came for the American dream, the promise that hard work and good character mattered more than the circumstances of birth. My husband believed in that dream, even as this town proved it was a lie. He died still believing, still hoping that his children would find that America, even if he never did. Her voice was steady, clear, carrying to every corner of the room. I will not let his dream die with him. I will not bow to your hate. I will not make myself small to make you comfortable. I am marrying Jake Morrison because I love him and he loves me, and because we choose each other freely with full knowledge of the consequences. If you cannot accept that, if you cannot wish us well or at least leave us in peace, then that says everything about you and nothing about us. She took Jake's hand and held it high between them. We came here for courtesy, to inform you as neighbors should be informed of major changes in the community. But we are not asking your permission. We are not seeking your blessing. We are not requesting your approval. We are simply living our lives with dignity and honor. And if you cannot understand that, perhaps you should examine why the sight of two people choosing love over loneliness threatens you so deeply. Good evening, gentlemen. They turned to leave, heads high, hands clasped, dignity intact. Behind them, the room exploded again in arguments and accusations. But Jake and Mei Lin didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the chaos they'd left in their wake. They were halfway to the door when someone stood, the scrape of a chair against wooden floorboards, loud despite the tumult. I support this marriage. Jake and Mei Lin stopped, turned. Sarah Cunningham stood at the side of the room, her face pale but resolute, her hands clasped in front of her but her chin high. I support this marriage, she repeated, louder now, braver. I've been a coward and a gossip and I'm ashamed of it. I've said cruel things and believed ugly lies and I was wrong, but I'm done being ashamed. I'm done being silent. These two people have shown more Christian love in the past 2 months than most of us have shown in years. If we can't celebrate their happiness, at least we can stop poisoning it with our judgment. I support this marriage. Another chair scraped. Doc Fletcher stood, his old face creased with a smile that held decades of wisdom. And I support it. Known Morrison for 20 years, known him when he was happy with Sarah, and known him through 12 years of grief. Never seen him more alive, more himself than he's been these past months. Known Mei Lin Chen since her husband died. Watched her hold her family together through hardship that would destroy most people. They're good for each other, good for those children. They have my blessing and my support. A third chair, Samuel Cooper, the blacksmith, rising slowly like an oak tree growing from stone. Don't talk much, never have. Words aren't my strength, but I'll say this much. Morrison's an honest man, always has been. Mrs. Chen's an honest woman. Raised those children right despite everything working against her. Honest people deserve happiness, deserve a chance at building something good. I support this marriage. 3 people standing in a room of 15. A minority, small and outnumbered and vulnerable to the same social ostracism that had crushed others. But standing nonetheless, speaking truth to power, or at least speaking truth to prejudice, risking their own standing to defend what was right. Jake felt Mei Lin's hand tighten in his, felt her lean against him for support. 3 allies. It wasn't many, it wasn't a majority. It wouldn't change the town overnight or make their lives easy. But it was more than they'd had before. It was a start. Thank you, Jake said simply, his voice rough with emotion. To Sarah, to Doc, to Samuel, to the courage it took to stand when sitting was easier, to speak when silence was safer. Thank you. They left then, truly left, walking out into the cold February night. Behind them, the meeting devolved into chaos, arguments about standards and morality and what it meant to be a community. But Jake and Mei Lin didn't hear it, didn't care. They'd said what needed saying. The town could accept it or reject it, but the choice was made. They walked to the wagon where 4 children waited, nervous and excited, trying to look brave. When the adults climbed up to the driver's bench, all 4 children started talking at once, asking what happened, how it went, what people said. Was it awful? Are they angry? Will there be trouble? 3 people stood for us, Mei Lin told them, her voice warm despite the cold. Mrs. Cunningham, Dr. Fletcher, and Mr. Cooper. 3 people stood up in front of everyone and said they supported our marriage. Only 3? Daniel's face fell, hope dimming. Out of the whole town? 3 is not nothing, son, Jake said, snapping the reins to start the horse moving, to take them home to warmth and safety. 3 is 3 more than we had yesterday. 3 cracks in a wall that looked unbreakable. 3 lights in what seemed like total darkness. 3 is enough to build on. You were brave in there, Mama, Tommy said, his voice full of pride. The way you talked to all those men, like they didn't scare you, you were so brave. We were brave, Mei Lin corrected, looking at Jake with love and gratitude. As a family, all of us, together. Yeah, Rose piped up from the back, her child's voice clear in the night. Papa Jake, too. He told them off real good, made them look small, even though he was talking about being good people. That's the best kind of telling off. Papa Jake. The title settled over him like a benediction, like coming home after years of wandering lost. Jake Morrison, who'd been a father for only 10 minutes before losing his son, who'd grieved that loss for 12 years, who'd thought that chapter of his life was closed forever, sealed shut by tragedy. Papa Jake. Yeah, he said, his voice thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. I told them off real good because nobody talks about my family that way. Nobody makes my children feel small or wrong or less than. Not anymore, not ever again. They rode home through the darkness. 6 people in a wagon built for 4. Crowded and cold, but utterly warm where it mattered. 3 allies in a hostile town, a wedding planned for Saturday, a future uncertain but faced together. The siege of ordinary cruelty continued. Would continue for months, probably years. The town would not suddenly embrace them. The prejudice would not magically vanish. Life would remain hard in ways both subtle and overt. But they had each other, had love and commitment, and the unshakable knowledge that they were choosing this, choosing each other, choosing to live with courage rather than hide in fear. And sometimes, on the hardest days, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The wagon rattled on through the frozen night, carrying a family toward home, toward warmth, toward whatever tomorrow would bring, carrying hope in the darkness, carrying love through the cold, carrying the promise of spring even in the deepest winter. Behind them, the town argued and judged and failed to understand what it meant to love across boundaries others had drawn. Ahead of them, a cabin waited, smoke rising from its chimney, windows glowing warm, a beacon calling them home. They were going home, all 6 of them, together. A family forged in hardship, tested by hate, strengthened by love. And that, Jake Morrison thought as he drove his unlikely family through the Montana night, was worth more than all the town's approval could ever be. The snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the world in white. Inside the wagon, 6 hearts beat as one, heading home to start preparing for a wedding that would change everything. The journey to the county seat began before dawn on a Saturday in late February, when the world was still more darkness than light, and the cold had teeth that bit through every layer of clothing. The wagon was packed with what little they needed for the 2-day journey, blankets and provisions stacked carefully in the bed and alongside the 4 children who huddled together for warmth, their breath misting white in the freezing air. Jake drove, his hands steady on the reins despite the cold that made his fingers ache. Mei Lin sat beside him, wrapped in her best shawl, the blue silk one she'd brought from China years ago, carefully preserved for special occasions. Under the shawl, she wore her wedding dress, not the traditional red of Chinese custom, but a simple gray wool that was practical for frontier life, yet somehow elegant in its simplicity. She'd sewn it herself in the evenings after the children slept, each stitch a meditation on the future she was choosing. Doc Fletcher and Sarah Cunningham rode behind them on horseback, the only witnesses they'd asked to accompany them on this journey. Samuel Cooper had wanted to come, had pleaded to be there, but couldn't leave his forge unmanned for 2 days without losing business he couldn't afford to lose. Instead, he'd pressed a small package into Jake's hand the night before, his weathered face serious. "Made these myself," he'd said. "Took me 3 tries to get them right. They're not fancy, but they're strong, like you 2. Inside were 2 silver rings, simple bands engraved with intertwining patterns that spoke of 2 lives becoming one. The metalwork was exquisite, the kind of craftsmanship that came from decades of working with fire and steel and understanding how to shape metal into meaning. The landscape rolled past as dawn broke over Montana, painting the snow-covered plains in shades of pink and gold. The mountains rose in the distance, massive and eternal, their snow-covered peaks catching the first light like beacons. The children, despite the cold in the early hour, were vibrating with excitement, their voices rising and falling in waves of chatter about the adventure of it all. They'd never traveled this far from home, never seen country beyond the familiar valleys and hills around their cabin. The world was suddenly wet and full of possibility, and even the cold couldn't dampen their enthusiasm. As the miles passed and the rhythm of the journey settled into something almost meditative, conversations deepened in the way they do when people are traveling together through vast empty spaces where there's nothing to do but talk and think and watch the horizon unfold. Daniel sat near the front of the wagon bed, close enough to hear his mother and soon-to-be stepfather talking in low voices about practical things, about the ranch and the supplies they'd need and the spring planting that would come soon. He listened for a while, then during a lull in the adult conversation, he spoke up. "Mama, tell us about Papa, about the real Papa, I mean, about what he was like when you first met him." Mei Lin turned in her seat to look at her oldest son, surprised by the request but understanding immediately what he was really asking. This wasn't about forgetting Robert or replacing him. This was about making sure that marrying Jake didn't erase the past, didn't dishonor the man who'd given them life and love and 17 years of devotion. Your father was 19 when I met him. I was 17, both of us fresh off the boat in San Francisco, both trying to make sense of this strange new country where everything was different from what we'd known. Her voice took on a quality Jake hadn't heard before, younger, full of memory, and an affection that time and loss hadn't diminished. He was so serious, so determined. He'd come to America with nothing but the clothes on his back and a promise to himself that he would build something worthy, something lasting, something that would honor his family back in China. How did he ask you to marry him? Lily wanted to know, leaning forward with the intensity of an 8-year-old who understood more about love than most adults gave her credit for. He didn't ask. Not at first. He was too shy, too afraid I'd say no. So instead he came to my uncle's shop where I was working, fixing shoes and doing laundry and mending torn clothes. He came every day for 2 months, always finding some excuse. A button that needed sewing, a tear that needed mending, a stain that needed removing. My uncle's shop was immaculate because of Robert Chen's transparent excuses. The children laughed even though they had heard the story before, even though they knew how it ended. Jake, who hadn't heard it, found himself smiling at the image of serious Robert Chen trying to court a girl through increasingly ridiculous repair requests. Finally, Mei Lin continued, her eyes distant with memory. My uncle took pity on him, told him to either ask me properly or stop wasting everyone's time with his see-through courtship. So Robert came the next day, and he brought no torn clothes, no broken buttons, just himself, and he said, she paused, gathering herself, and Jake saw the tears gathering in her eyes. Not sad tears exactly, memory tears. The kind that come when you're honoring something precious that's gone. He said, Mei Lin, I am not a rich man, and I may never be. I am not educated in the ways of this country. My English is poor, and my prospects are uncertain. But I am honest, and I will work until my hands bleed to give you a good life. I will honor you every day we have together. I will build a home where you are safe and our children are loved. Will you take a chance on me? And I said yes, because honesty and hard work and the promise of safety seemed better than all the pretty words in the world. Jake listened, learning about the man whose children he was about to legally claim as his own. Learning about the promises Robert had made and kept, about the 17 years of marriage that had produced 4 remarkable children and a love that survived death itself. Learning about the kind of man who would die helping a neighbor fix a fence, who would put others before himself even at the cost of everything. He would have liked you, I think, Mei Lin said to Jake, her hand finding his on the reins. You're alike in the ways that matter. The honesty, the willingness to work until your hands bleed, the refusal to be anything less than what you are, no matter the cost. I hope so, Jake said quietly, his throat tight. I hope he'd approve of me taking care of what was his, what he built, what he died protecting. What is yours now too, Mei Lin corrected gently. What is ours together? Robert's children and Sarah's husband, becoming a new family. They're both part of us, Jake. We carry them forward even as we build something new. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the cold lunch Sarah Cunningham had packed for them with a care that spoke of love and support. Thick sandwiches of bread and meat, apples from someone's root cellar, hard cheese that would keep in the cold, and a jar of milk that had half frozen during the ride. The children tumbled out of the wagon like puppies released from a pen, running in the snow to release energy pent up from hours of sitting. Jake watched them play, watched Daniel show Tommy how to pack snow into hard balls for throwing, watched Lily help Rose build a small snowman with stones for eyes and a stick for a nose, watched his family, because that's what they were now, in every way that mattered except the legal recognition they were riding toward. Doc Fletcher approached him as he stood watching, handed him a small flask of whiskey. For courage. Jake shook his head. Don't need courage. Already made up my mind. Heart's been made up for months, if I'm being honest. Not for the marrying, son. For everything that comes after. Doc took a sip himself, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Town's not going to forgive this, you know. Won't forget. Years from now, decades even, they'll still remember that you chose her over them. That you stood up in front of everyone and said their hate didn't matter. Good. Want them to remember. Want them to know that some things matter more than their approval, That some people are worth more than comfort and acceptance and fitting in. You love her that much? Jake thought about it, about how to quantify something that felt bigger than words, deeper than any explanation could capture. I love her enough to face whatever comes. Love those children enough to stand between them and anything that tries to hurt them. Love this family enough to choose it over everything else, every single time. That much I know for certain. That's enough then. That's more than most people ever have in a whole lifetime. Doc clapped him on the shoulder with a force that nearly staggered him. You're a good man, Jake Morrison. Better than you give yourself credit for. Those kids are lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one. They're giving me a second chance at being a father, at having a family, at being alive instead of just waiting to die. The county seat was a larger town than their own settlement, big enough to support a hotel with actual beds and a courthouse made of stone instead of wood, in the kind of anonymity that smaller places never afforded. Here, Jake and Mei Lin were just another couple getting married, not a scandal waiting to happen. The justice of the peace was a weary-looking man in his 60s named Jedediah Walsh, who'd clearly performed enough weddings to find them routine rather than romantic. His office was small and cluttered, paperwork stacked on every surface, a general air of bureaucratic disorder that spoke of too much work and not enough time. You got a license? He asked without looking up from the papers he was sorting, his voice carrying the flat efficiency of a man who'd said these words 1,000 times before. Jake produced it, the marriage license he'd obtained on a previous trip, paying the fee and answering the questions and providing all the documentation the territory of Montana required. The justice examined it with the practiced eye of someone looking for discrepancies, noted that all the information was correct, then looked up at them properly for the first time. His eyes went from Jake to Mei Lin and back again, taking in the height difference, the age difference, the obvious racial difference. Something shifted in his expression, not quite disapproval, but recognition. He knew what he was looking at, a white man and a Chinese woman, a union that was legal, technically permitted by territorial law, but controversial enough to raise eyebrows even 60 miles from home. You understand what you're doing? He asked Jake, his tone neither judgmental nor approving, just matter of fact. The complications this kind of marriage brings, the social difficulties, the way people will treat you and any children you might have. We have 4 children already, Jake said evenly, hers from her first marriage, mine now by choice. And yes, I understand perfectly what this means. Been living it for months, still choosing it. The justice turned to Mei Lin, studied her face with an intensity that might have been rude in other circumstances, but here was just professional thoroughness. And you, ma'am? You're entering this marriage of your own free will? No coercion, no pressure, no circumstances forcing your hand? Mei Lin lifted her chin, met his gaze with a steadiness that made the old man blink. I am entering this marriage with full knowledge and complete willingness. This man has shown me and my children more kindness and honor than we have received from anyone else in this territory. He saved our lives. He stood with us when everyone else turned away. I am choosing him freely, gratefully, and without a single reservation. The justice nodded slowly, something that might have been approval flickering across his weathered face. All right then, let's make it official. They gathered in the small office, the air close and warm from the stove in the corner. 6 people about to become a family in the eyes of the law, witnessed and recorded for posterity. Doc and Sarah stood as official witnesses, the 4 children pressed close, Jake and Mei Lin facing each other across the justice's battered desk that had seen countless couples make the same promises. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory at first. Justice Walsh read the legal requirements in a monotone that suggested he could recite them in his sleep, asked the necessary questions about impediments in legal capacity, required the proper responses that made the marriage binding under territorial law. But when it came time for vows, when the old man asked if they wanted to speak any personal promises to each other beyond the legal minimums, something shifted in the room. Jake found words rising up from somewhere deep, from a place he hadn't known existed until Mei Lin had opened it. Mei Lin Chen, he began, his voice rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. I thought my life was over when Sarah died. Thought I'd lost my only chance at family, at love, at being anything more than a shell of a man waiting to die. Spent 12 years proving myself right, hiding from the world, talking to ghosts instead of living people. He paused, swallowed hard. Then you appeared, you and these children, and you showed me I was wrong about everything. Life can begin again if you're brave enough to reach for it. Love can grow in the coldest winters. Family can be built by choice instead of blood. You taught me all of that just by being who you are. The children were crying now, trying to be quiet about it. Sarah Cunningham had tears running down her face. Even Doc Fletcher looked suspiciously emotional. I vow to honor your past, Jake continued, his eyes locked on Mei Lin's. To never ask you to forget Robert or pretend he didn't exist. To make sure these children know their father was a good man who loved them. I vow to cherish your present, to see you for who you are right now, not who I wish you were. I vow to build your future, to stand with you against whatever comes, to be the partner you deserve. I vow to love your children as my own blood, and to raise them with the same care and devotion you have shown. Until death takes me, you have all of me. Everything I am, everything I have, everything I can be. It's all yours. Mei Lin's tears fell freely now, catching the weak winter light from the single window and making her eyes shine like stars. When she spoke, her voice was clear, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Jake Morrison, you appeared in our darkest winter like an answer to prayers I'd stopped believing would be heard. We were starving, we were freezing, we were losing hope, and you brought us food and warmth and the courage to keep fighting. But more than that, you gave us dignity. You looked at us and saw people worth saving, worth standing with, worth loving. That gift is beyond price. She reached across the desk, took his hands in hers. I vow to be your partner, your equal in all things, not your burden, not your charity case, but your true companion. I vow to be your strength when you falter, because even strong men need someone to lean on sometimes. I vow to honor Sarah's memory while building our future, to make room in my heart for both the love I had and the love I have now. I vow to build a home where love, not blood, defines family, where kindness matters more than ancestry, where courage is valued over conformity. Her voice strengthened. I vow to choose you, Jake Morrison. Every way, in every way, against every opposition. When the town turns against us, I choose you. When the law makes our lives difficult, I choose you. When people whisper and judge and condemn, I choose you. For as long as I live, you have me. All of me, every broken piece, every strength, every dream, it's all yours. The office was silent except for the sound of people crying, moved by vows that went beyond legal formulas into something deeper and more binding than any law could create. Justice Walsh cleared his throat roughly, clearly moved despite years of professional detachment. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Morrison, you may kiss your bride. Jake leaned across the desk and kissed Mei Lin Chen Morrison, sealing promises made in a dusty office 60 miles from home, witnessed by 2 friends and 4 children who understood better than most what this meant. The kiss was gentle and deep, full of promise and possibility, and the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, they could have this, could keep this, could protect this against everything the world would throw at them. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. Both looked younger than they had in months, lighter somehow, as if the legal recognition of what they already knew had lifted a weight neither had realized they were carrying. Congratulations, Justice Walsh said, signing the marriage certificate with a flourish that seemed almost celebratory. You're officially family now, all 6 of you. May you have many years of happiness together, and may those who judge you come to understand what I see here today. Love worth fighting for. They spent that night at the hotel, 2 rooms side by side. The children in one room with Sarah Cunningham watching over them, making sure they bathed and ate and settled down despite their excitement. Jake and Mei Lin in the other room, alone together as husband and wife for the first time. The room was simple, clean, furnished with a bed and a washstand and a single chair. Mei Lin stood by the window looking out at the darkened street, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't been before. This was different from the kisses they'd shared, the hands they'd held. This was marriage. This was forever. This was choosing to be vulnerable in ways she hadn't been since Robert died. Jake came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on the top of her head. Having second thoughts? No, just first thoughts about tomorrow and the day after and all the days we'll have. Thinking about how unlikely this is, how impossible it seemed just months ago, how grateful I am. I'm the grateful one. You gave me back my life. She turned in his arms, looked up at him. Then we're even. Now stop talking and kiss your wife. What happened next was tender and slow. Two people who'd loved before and lost, finding their way back to intimacy with patience and care. They learned each other's bodies, each other's rhythms, each other's ways of showing love beyond words. And when they finally lay together in the aftermath, exhausted and content, Mei Lin rested her head on Jake's chest and listened to his heartbeat. No regrets? He asked quietly. Not one, not a single one. Even knowing what we're riding back into tomorrow, the town, the judgment, all of it, especially knowing that, because now we face it as husband and wife, as a legally recognized family. They can hate it, but they can't undo it. We're married, it's done, it's real. I love you, Mrs. Morrison. She smiled against his skin. I love you too, Mr. Morrison, my husband. The words felt new and ancient at the same time. Husband, wife, partners, promises made and sealed, witnessed and recorded, real in ways that went beyond ceremony into something fundamental and unshakable. The return journey took 2 days because they stopped overnight at a friendly homesteader's place Doc Fletcher knew, a family called the Martins who asked no questions and offered warm hospitality. The wife, Eleanor Martin, fussed over Mei Lin and the children, gave them the best bedroom, prepared a feast as if they were royalty instead of strangers passing through. Don't see enough joy in this world, she said when Jake tried to thank her. Seeing people choose love despite everything, that's worth celebrating. You're welcome in our home anytime. By the time they reached Jake's ranch on Monday afternoon, the children were tired but happy, full of stories about the big town and the hotel and the kind people they'd met and the adventure of it all. The ranch house sat on its ridge like a castle, larger and more solid than the cabin Mei Lin had called home for 7 years. She stood in the wagon looking at it, and Jake saw the bittersweet expression cross her face. Joy at this beautiful home that was now hers. Sadness at leaving the cabin where she'd lived with Robert, where her children had been born, where memories lived in every board and beam and crack in the plaster. We can go back, Jake said quietly. Take our time, get your things, say goodbye properly. They did, all 6 of them making the trip down to the cabin in the valley one last time. Mei Lin moved through the small space like someone saying farewell to a dear friend, touching walls, remembering. The place where Rose had been born during a snowstorm, the corner where Daniel had learned to walk, the window where she'd watched Robert leave for the last time, not knowing she'd never see him alive again. The children gathered their few possessions with a reverence that spoke of understanding. Robert's carved box with his precious things, the dishes they'd eaten from every day, Lily's careful collection of drawings, Tommy's wooden toys, some of them made by Robert's hands, the curtains Mei Lin had sewn from flour sacks, carefully dyed and hemmed. Jake watched her take down Robert's photograph from the mantel, the only image they had of him, and wrap it carefully in cloth. He comes with us, she said firmly. He's part of this family too, part of who we are and who we'll always be. Of course he does. Jake helped her pack the small shrine she'd kept hidden in a drawer, the incense and the small porcelain statue of Guanyin, the goddess of mercy. All of it comes. Your past, my past, everything that made us who we are. We're not erasing anything. We're adding to it. When the cabin was empty of personal items, stripped of the things that had made it a home, Mei Lin stood in the doorway one last time. Thank you, she whispered to the walls, to the memories, to the ghost of the life she'd lived here. Thank you for shelter when we needed it. Thank you for love. Thank you for these children. Thank you for 17 years of marriage. I'm not forgetting. I'm just moving forward. Just living like Robert made me promise to live. The ranch house swallowed them up in its spaciousness. 4 bedrooms upstairs, each one larger than the entire cabin loft had been. A kitchen big enough to cook for a ranch crew, with a stove that had 6 burners and an oven that could hold 3 pies at once. A parlor with a fireplace you could stand up in, surrounded by built-in bookshelves that Jake had installed for Sarah but never filled. The children ran from room to room, their voices echoing in the high-ceiling spaces, marveling at the luxury of it all. choosing bedrooms, planning where things would go, discovering closets and cupboards in spaces they'd never imagined having. Mei Lin stood in the kitchen, running her hands over the smooth counter surface, looking at the stove that was twice the size of her old one, taking in the pantry that could hold enough food to feed them for months. "It's so much," she said, almost overwhelmed. "So much space. So much of everything." "It's ours," Jake corrected, coming up behind her. "Every inch of it belongs to all of us now. Make it yours, Mei Lin. Change whatever you want. Move furniture, paint walls, tear down, and rebuild if that's what feels right. This is your home now. Make it feel like home, however you need to." She turned to him, this man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing in return. "It already feels like home, because you're here, because the children are safe and warm. That's what makes it home, not the size or the stove or any of it, just us, together." For 2 weeks, they lived in what Jake later thought of as their honeymoon period, a brief interlude of domestic happiness before the world intruded again. The children settled into their rooms, explored every corner of the ranch, learned about cattle and horses and the rhythms of ranch life that were so different from subsistence farming. Mei Lin transformed the kitchen, reorganizing to her preferences, introducing Chinese cooking alongside American fare. The house filled with smells it had never known in all its years of existence: ginger and garlic and star anise, soy sauce and sesame oil, rice steaming in the pot, the familiar scent that meant home to her even here in this foreign land. Jake taught Daniel the business side of ranching, how to read cattle for health and weight, how to judge market conditions, how to plan for seasons and years ahead instead of just scrambling day to day. The boy absorbed it all like a sponge, asked intelligent questions, showed an aptitude for the work that made Jake proud. Tommy learned to ride properly, spending hours in the barn with the horses, discovering a natural gift for understanding them. Lily found the upstairs bedroom with its south-facing window perfect for drawing, the light streaming in to illuminate her careful work. Rose simply reveled in having a father again, following Jake everywhere she was allowed, chattering constantly, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and safe. But the isolation began to weigh, particularly on Mei Lin. They were self-sufficient on the ranch, could go weeks or even months without needing anything from town. But she, who'd always been part of a community even when that community rejected her, felt the loneliness of complete separation. "Can we really live like this forever?" she asked Jake one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Alone out here, cut off from everyone except Doc and Sarah and Samuel? You want to go back to town, face them again after everything?" "I want the children to have community, to see other people, to learn how to live in the world instead of just hiding from it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I don't want their fear of cruelty to make them small, Jake. Don't want them growing up thinking isolation is the only safety. That's not living. That's just existing." Jake understood, probably better than she knew. He'd chosen isolation for 12 years, and it had nearly killed his soul, had turned him into something less than human. "We'll engage with town on our own terms then. Won't hide, but won't beg for acceptance either. We'll show them dignity, and if they choose cruelty in response, that's on them. But we'll give the children chances to see how the world works, even the ugly parts." The cruelty, when it came, arrived in waves that tested their resolve and resources. The first wave was economic warfare. Jack Brennan organized a formal boycott, got all the other merchants to agree. A sign went up in the general store window, carefully lettered to look official. "We reserve the right to refuse service to any customer for any reason." Every shop in town followed suit within a week. The blacksmith, though he hated it, the feed store, the dry goods merchant, a coordinated effort to financially strangle the Morrison family, to make survival impossible without leaving or capitulating to the town's demands. Jake's response was methodical rather than emotional. He inventoried everything they would need for the next 6 months, then made the long trip to the town 40 miles west, a 2-day journey each way. He established accounts there, explained his situation honestly, found merchants happy to have his business and unconcerned about his choice of wife. He bought in bulk, enough to last through spring and into summer. Flour by the barrel, salt and sugar in 100-pound sacks, enough nails and rope and tools to handle any repair. It cost more in time and transportation, made every purchase more expensive, but it worked. They could survive without the local town's cooperation. Sarah Cunningham helped too, continuing her quiet rebellion with greater boldness now. She placed orders supposedly for herself, then delivered them to the Morrison ranch under cover of darkness. Small things mostly, items Jake couldn't easily transport in bulk. Thread and needles for Mei Lin's sewing, lamp oil, the occasional treat for the children, books for Daniel's continuing education. The second wave was legal harassment dressed up as legitimate grievance. A claim jumper named Thomas Welch filed a boundary dispute, saying Jake's fence encroached 3 feet onto what Welch claimed was public land. It was transparently baseless. Anyone who looked at the official surveys could see that Jake's property lines were exactly where they should be. But baseless or not, it required Jake to hire a lawyer at $2 an hour, to travel to the county seat for hearings, to spend money and time defending what was rightfully his. The case dragged on for 3 weeks before being dismissed, but it cost $300 in legal fees and the better part of a month in time and stress. Dr. Fletcher testified about the property lines, having surveyed them himself years ago when Jake first built the ranch. His testimony was unimpeachable, his reputation beyond question. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, but the damage was done. $300 might as well have been $3,000 for the impact it had on their finances. The message was clear. They would use any tool available, any legal mechanism, any pressure point they could find to make life difficult. The third wave escalated from economic and legal to physical. One night in mid-March, shots rang out near the ranch house. Not aimed at people, Jake was certain of that, but at livestock. 2 of his best breeding cows were killed, another wounded so badly that Jake had to put her down himself, the animal's terrified eyes watching him as he ended her suffering. The shooters left no trace, no evidence that could be taken to the law. But the message was unmistakable. Violence was on the table now. Escalation was not just possible but promised. Jake armed himself, began patrolling at night with a rifle and a lantern. Daniel, despite being only 13, insisted on helping, learning to shoot straight, to watch the darkness, to protect what was theirs. Mei Lin learned too, practicing with the rifle until she could hit targets at 100 yards. They turned their home into something approaching a fortress, always watching, always ready, sleeping in shifts to ensure someone was always alert. The fourth wave was perhaps the cruelest because it echoed the past in ways that brought back Mei Lin's worst memories. Tommy developed a cough in late March, just a small thing at first, the kind of cough every child gets during winter. But it worsened over days, becoming deeper, wetter, settling into his chest with an ominous sound. The same symptoms Robert had shown before the pneumonia killed him. Mei Lin went white when she recognized it, when the sound of Tommy's cough transported her back to that terrible February night when Robert's lungs had filled with fluid and nothing they did could save him. No, not again. Please God, not my boy, not again. Doc Fletcher came immediately when summoned, examined Tommy with grave concern. The boy's fever was climbing, his breathing labored. Could be pneumonia developing. Could just be a severe chest cold. The next 48 hours will tell us which. Keep him warm. Fluids constantly. These medicines every 4 hours without fail. And prayer. In my experience, prayer doesn't hurt, even if you don't believe it works. They nursed Tommy through 2 days that felt like 2 years, keeping him warm with hot water bottles and blankets, dosing him with the medicines Doc left, trying to get fluids into him when he was barely conscious. Jake sat with the boy through the worst of it, holding his hand, telling him stories about Sarah and the ranch and the life they were building, refusing to let him slip away into fever dreams that might not release him. Mei Lin barely slept, barely ate, moving between prayer and action, burning incense at her shrine while also changing cold cloths on her son's forehead. Daniel, Tommy, Lily, Rose, 4 children. She couldn't lose one, couldn't bear it, would break if she had to bury a child. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Tommy woke clear-eyed, weak but breathing easier. The crisis passed. When he asked for food, Mei Lin collapsed in Jake's arms, sobbing with relief so profound it felt like drowning, with gratitude so intense it hurt. I thought we were going to lose him, she whispered into Jake's shirt. I thought I was going to watch another person I loved die and be powerless to stop it. But we didn't lose him. We fought through, together. The strain of 4 crises in as many weeks was beginning to tell. Jake saw it in Mei Lin's face, in the tightness around her eyes, in the way she startled at unexpected sounds. Saw it in the children's wariness, the way they'd lost some of their easy joy. "How long can we sustain this?" Mei Lin asked him late one night, both of them exhausted from nursing Tommy back to health. "How long before they break us, Jake? How long before the constant pressure crushes what we're trying to build?" "They won't break us. Can't break us unless we let them. And I won't let them. We won't let them." But the children, the constant stress, the fear. Tommy nearly died, and part of me wonders if the stress of everything contributed to him getting sick. Is this the life we want for them? Is survival enough? Jake had no easy answer because he'd been asking himself the same questions. No, survival isn't enough, but it's what we have right now until things change or until we make them change. The change, when it came, arrived from the most unexpected quarter imaginable. Late one night in early April, pounding came at the door. Urgent, desperate, the kind of knock that spoke of emergency. Jake grabbed his rifle, approached cautiously, every sense alert for a trap. "Who is it?" "Margaret Brennan." The voice was female, shaking, terrified. "Please, I need help. It's Jack. He's hurt bad." Jake opened the door to find Margaret Brennan standing in the darkness, her dress disheveled, her hair coming loose from its pins, her face streaked with tears that had frozen on her cheeks. Behind her in the yard, a wagon stood with its horse stamping nervously, and in the wagon bed lay Jack Brennan, unconscious and bleeding. Mei Lin appeared at Jake's shoulder, saw the scene, understood immediately what was happening. Their worst enemy, the man who'd organized the boycott, who'd led every harassment campaign, who'd done everything possible to destroy them, was hurt and vulnerable and dependent on their mercy. "What happened?" Jake asked, his voice carefully neutral. "He fell from the barn loft, was fixing a hole in the roof, lost his footing, fell 20 feet onto the hard ground, hit his head on a rock, won't wake up, won't respond. I think he might be dying." Margaret's voice broke. "Doc Fletcher's in the Capitol at some medical conference. Won't be back for 3 days. You're the only ones close enough, the only ones who might know medicine, please." She looked at both of them. This woman who'd sat silent while her husband spewed hate, who'd never once spoken up to defend them, who'd chosen comfort over conscience at every turn. "I know we've been terrible to you. I know my husband has done things that are unforgivable. I know we don't deserve your help. But he's still my husband, still my children's father. Please don't let him die because of what he's done, please." The moment stretched out, pregnant with possibility. This was the choice that would define them, Jake understood. This was where they decided who they were in the face of the ultimate test. Revenge would be easy. Turn her away, let her make the 2-day journey to the next town. Let her suffer the way they'd been made to suffer. Justice in its cold and perfect way. Or mercy, the harder choice. The choice that said they were better than the hate that had been shown them. The choice that would teach their children what it meant to be truly good, not just good when it was convenient. Mei Lin stepped forward, looked at the unconscious man who'd called her a whore, who'd turned an entire town against her family, who'd tried to starve her children and drive them from their home. Looked at his wife, terrified and desperate, and facing the possibility of becoming a widow. "Bring him inside," Mei Lin said quietly, her voice steady despite everything. "Put him on the couch in the parlor. I'll need clean water, towels, good light. Jake, wake Daniel and send him for whatever medical supplies we have." Margaret's eyes went wide with disbelief. "You'll help him? After everything? After all the things he's said about you, all the things he's done?" "I'll help him because cruelty answered with cruelty only breeds more cruelty. Because someone has to choose to be better, to break the cycle. And because my children are watching, what I do right now will teach them more about what it means to be human than any words I could ever speak. I will not teach them that we become like the people who hurt us. I will teach them that we become better." They carried Jack Brennan into the house he would have burned down if he'd had the courage, laid him on furniture he'd have been appalled to know he touched, placed him in the care of the woman he'd tried to destroy. Mei Lin examined him with steady hands born of necessity and years of frontier living, checking pupils that didn't respond properly to light, feeling for fractures in his skull, assessing the damage with knowledge gained from helping Robert tend injuries over 17 years of marriage. Concussion, severe, could have bleeding inside the skull, could be just swelling and trauma. No way to know for certain without surgery we can't do here. He needs complete rest, no movement, constant monitoring. Someone watching him every moment for the next 3 days, minimum. She looked at Margaret with professional distance. If he wakes, that's good. If he doesn't wake in 48 hours, he probably never will. And if he wakes but seems confused, violent, not himself, that could mean brain damage. We won't know for days what the outcome will be. Can I take him home? Watch him there in his own bed? No. Jake's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Moving him now could kill him. The brain is swelling. Any jostling, any rough handling could make bleeding worse if there is bleeding. He stays here. You stay here. We all watch him together. That's the only way he has a chance. Margaret Brennan spent 3 days in the Morrison house, sleeping in a guest room that had never been used, sitting vigil by her husband's bedside while the woman he'd tried to destroy worked tirelessly to save his life. On the second day, sitting in the kitchen while Mei Lin prepared broth in case Jack woke and could swallow, Margaret finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her since they'd arrived. Why? Please, I need to understand. Why are you doing this? Why help us when we've shown you nothing but hate? When Jack has led every campaign against you? When he's tried to drive you from this territory? Why not just let him die and be done with it? Mei Lin was quiet for a long moment, stirring the broth, considering how to answer honestly without cruelty. Because I have 4 children who are watching everything I do. 4 children who are learning what it means to be human, what it means to have power over someone and choose mercy instead of revenge. I want them to learn that we don't become like the people who hurt us. That having the power to hurt someone and choosing not to is the essence of strength. That we are defined not by what others do to us, but by how we choose to respond. You're a better Christian than most Christians I know. Better than me, certainly. I'm not Christian, I'm Buddhist, when I'm anything religious at all. But I believe in compassion, in choosing light over darkness, in refusing to let other people's cruelty define who I become, in treating others the way I wish to be treated, not the way they've treated me. Margaret wept then, quietly, the kind of tears that come from shame and recognition and the shattering of carefully built walls. I've been so wrong about you, about all of this. I let Jack's hate become my hate because it was easier than standing up to him, easier than risking his anger or the town's disapproval, easier than being strong enough to say no. I understand, women don't have many choices in this world. Sometimes survival means bowing to things we disagree with. Sometimes keeping the peace in your own home matters more than fighting battles outside it. That's no excuse. I have a voice. I just chose not to use it. Chose comfort over conscience. Chose being accepted over being right. She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. I'm sorry for all of it, for everything Jack did and everything I allowed by my silence. Apologies are a start. Changed behavior is better. Jack Brennan woke on the third day confused and in pain and disoriented. His eyes opened slowly, struggled to focus, finally managed to see his wife sitting beside him and Mei Lin checking his pulse with professional competence. Where am I? His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. The Morrison Ranch, Margaret said, taking his hand. You fell from the barn loft, hit your head. Doc Fletcher was gone and I didn't know what else to do, so I brought you here. Mrs. Morrison has been caring for you. She's probably saved your life. Jack's eyes went wide as understanding dawned, as the situation penetrated the fog of confusion and pain. The Chinese woman, you let the Chinese woman touch me? You brought me to their house? The Chinese woman who is a skilled healer saved your life while you were unconscious, Margaret said, her voice containing a steel Jake had never heard from her before. She's barely slept for 3 days. She's monitored you constantly, dosed you with medicines, kept you alive when you should have died. So yes, I let her touch you. I begged her to touch you, and she did it even though you've spent months trying to destroy her. Jake appeared in the doorway, filling it with his size and quiet authority. You're in my house, Brennan. My wife has spent 3 days keeping you from dying, giving you the kind of care most people charge money for. You can be grateful for that. You can be quiet, or you can leave right now and take your chances. But if you stay in this house one more minute, you will be respectful to the woman who saved you. Your choice. Make it fast. The room held its breath. Jack Brennan, confronted with the impossible situation of owing his life to the people he'd tried to destroy. Margaret finally finding her voice and using it to defend what was right instead of enabling what was wrong. Mei Lin standing calmly in the presence of her enemy with nothing but professional competence showing on her face. Jake making absolutely clear that his home had rules and they would be followed regardless of who the guest was. "I need to check your pupils again," Mei Lin said, her voice professional, neutral, giving nothing away, "and ask you some questions about memory to assess if there's been permanent brain damage. Will you cooperate, Mr. Brennan? Or should I leave you to your wife's inexpert care?" Jack looked at her, really looked at her, for what might have been the first time in his life. Saw not a threat or a foreigner or a thing to be hated. Saw a woman who'd saved his life when she had every reason and right to let him die. Saw competence and skill and mercy he didn't deserve. "I'll cooperate," he said quietly. The examination revealed no permanent damage, just a severe concussion that would require weeks of rest and careful monitoring. Margaret took him home that afternoon, her gratitude written in every word, every gesture, every tear she tried to hide. At the door, before climbing into the wagon, she turned to Mei Lin one last time. "I'll never forget this. What you did, the mercy you showed when you had every right to show cruelty. I'll never forget. Just remember it when the town talks," Mei Lin said. "Remember that we're not what they say we are. We're just people trying to live with dignity and raise our children to be good. That's all we've ever been." Margaret nodded, helped her husband into the wagon with gentle hands, and drove away into the afternoon light. The change wasn't immediate or dramatic. Jack Brennan didn't stand up in church and apologize for his years of prejudice, didn't publicly acknowledge what had happened or reverse his position on Chinese immigration or admit he'd been wrong. But the boycott quietly ended within 2 weeks. Other merchants, learning what had occurred, began to question the righteousness of their stance. If the Morrisons were cruel monsters, would they have saved their worst enemy's life? Brennan himself, when he passed Jake in town several weeks later, gave a brief nod. Not friendship, not approval, not even full acknowledgement, but recognition that something had shifted, that a debt existed that couldn't be paid but could be honored in small ways. Margaret became something more than an ally. She became an active supporter, defending Mei Lin in conversations among the women of the town, pushing back against gossip with facts about what had really happened. "My husband would be dead if not for her skill and mercy," she'd say, and that simple statement did more to change minds than any amount of preaching could have done. That evening, after the Brennans had gone and the house was quiet again, Jake found Mei Lin sitting on the porch looking out at the mountains turning purple in the fading light. He sat beside her, took her hand, held it gently. "You were magnificent," he said. "I was terrified the whole time, terrified I'd make a mistake, that he'd die anyway, that they'd blame us despite our best efforts. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is. Not absence of fear, but acting despite it. Doing what's right even when you're shaking inside." Mei Lin leaned against him, drew strength from his solid presence. "The children were watching the whole time. Daniel asked me afterward why we helped a man who'd been so cruel to us. Why we didn't just turn them away and let him find help elsewhere." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that mercy isn't for the person who receives it. It's for the person who gives it. That choosing kindness, even when hatred seems justified, is how we keep our own souls intact. How we stay human instead of becoming hard and bitter and empty." "What did he say?" "He said he understood, said he wants to be the kind of man who helps even when it's hard. The kind of man who chooses light over darkness, even when darkness seems easier." She smiled. "I think he's going to be all right, Jake. All of them are going to be all right. Despite everything this town has thrown at them, they're learning to be good people in a world that doesn't always reward goodness. They're learning from the best teacher." Jake kissed her forehead, tasted the salt of tears she'd been too strong to shed until now. "You're raising them right, Mei Lin. Robert would be proud of what you've made of his children. We're raising them right, together. You're as much their father now as Robert ever was. Different, but no less important." Inside the house, the children were preparing supper, their voices raised in some minor argument about whose turn it was to set the table and who'd shirked their chores. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the sounds of a family living their life despite the siege, despite the cruelty, despite everything the world had thrown at them. The winter was finally beginning to loosen its grip on Montana. April brought warmer days, longer light, The first hints that spring was not just a promise, but an approaching reality. Snow melted on the south-facing slopes, revealing brown grass underneath that would turn green in weeks. The creek began to run with snowmelt, the ice breaking up and flowing away in chunks that caught the sunlight. Jake stood with Mei Lin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple and rose. Colors so beautiful they almost hurt to look at. 6 weeks married, 6 weeks of crisis and challenge, and learning to be a family under pressure that would have broken most people. 6 weeks of proving that what they'd built was strong enough to weather whatever came. Do you think it will ever get easier? Mei Lin asked, her hand in his. Maybe, maybe not. The town might always look at us askance, might always judge, might always make our lives harder than necessary. He squeezed her hand, but I know it's worth it. Every hard day, every challenge, every moment of doubt. Worth it for this, for us, for them, for the family we've built against all odds. I love you, Jake Morrison. I love you too, Mrs. Morrison, my wife, my partner, my everything. They stood together as night fell over the ranch, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky like promises written in light, as another day ended and tomorrow waited with its unknown challenges and possibilities. Two people who'd been alone too long, who'd found each other in the coldest season, who'd chosen love over fear and mercy over revenge, even when revenge would have been justified. The winter had tested them in every way possible, had thrown economic pressure, legal harassment, physical violence, illness, and the ultimate moral complexity of helping the enemy at their most vulnerable. Each test had strengthened rather than broken them, had proven what they were made of, had shown their children what it meant to live with integrity in a world that often rewarded the opposite. Spring was coming, not just to Montana, but to their lives, to their family, to their future. The hardest winter was behind them. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, 6 souls bound by choice rather than blood, by love rather than obligation, by the courage to keep choosing each other even when the world said they shouldn't. Inside the house, Daniel called that supper was ready, his voice carrying the authority of the eldest child who'd learned to lead without being asked. The family gathered around the table that Jake had built for Sarah, but now served a different family. 6 people bound by love and choice and shared survival. Jake said grace, his rough voice stumbling over words of gratitude for blessings he still didn't quite believe he deserved, for second chances, and found family and children who call him Papa, and a wife who saw past his rough exterior to the man underneath. Then they ate and talked and laughed at Rose's silly jokes and listened to Lily describe the bird she'd seen that morning. They lived, just lived. Despite everything, because of everything, in defiance of everything that said they shouldn't exist, they lived. And outside, the winter finally began its retreat, making way for the spring that had been promised all along. The last winter before everything changed. The last winter before hope became reality. The last winter before the world learned that love, real love, was stronger than hate could ever hope to be. The siege would continue in small ways, would probably continue for years, perhaps for their entire lives. But the battle for their family's soul had been won. They'd proven who they were, what they stood for, what they would and wouldn't compromise. They'd shown mercy to their enemy and taught their children what true strength looked like. And that, Jake Morrison thought as he looked around the table at his unlikely family, was worth more than all the town's acceptance could ever be. The change in Jack Brennan's attitude, subtle though it was, rippled through the town like a stone thrown into still water. People whispered about what had happened, about the Chinese woman saving her enemy's life, about mercy shown where none was deserved. Some dismissed it as exaggeration or Chinese witchcraft. Others, the ones with functioning consciences, began to question their own certainty about who the Morrisons really were. But the real transformation came from an unexpected quarter, and it began with a boy. Pastor William Hart's grandson arrived in early May on the stage from St. Louis, a sullen 14-year-old named Michael with eyes that had seen too much loss too soon. His parents had died of cholera in the spring outbreak that swept through Missouri, leaving him orphaned and angry and with nowhere to go except to the grandfather he barely knew in a Montana town he'd never seen. Hart met the stage with awkward formality, a man unaccustomed to children and uncertain how to connect with this bitter young stranger who bore his daughter's eyes. They shook hands like business associates rather than family, and Michael's first words were a challenge. I don't want to be here. They made me come, said I had no choice. Life rarely gives us the choices we want, boy. Best you learn that now. It was not an auspicious beginning. Michael fit poorly into the rigid structure of Hart's household. The pastor expected discipline, obedience, gratitude for being taken in. Michael gave him rebellion, silence, and a simmering rage that had nowhere to go except inward. He refused to attend church, refused to participate in the youth activities Hart arranged, refused to do anything except exist in a state of barely contained fury at the unfairness of a world that had taken everything from him. The town's children, sensing weakness the way predators sense wounded prey, circled Michael with casual cruelty. He was the outsider, the orphan, the city boy in frontier country. They mocked his clothes, his accent, his grief. And Michael, having nothing left to lose, fought back with a violence that shocked the settlement. 3 weeks after his arrival, Michael discovered the Morrison children, or rather they discovered him, sitting alone by the creek that ran through town, skipping stones with mechanical precision and a face that suggested he was imagining each stone was someone's head. Daniel approached first, cautious but curious. At 13, he recognized another soul carrying weight too heavy for young shoulders. You're the new kid, Pastor Hart's grandson. So what if I am? Nothing, just making conversation. Daniel sat on a nearby rock, uninvited but unthreatening. I'm Daniel Morrison. Michael's head snapped up. Morrison, you're one of the Chinese kids, the ones everyone talks about, the ones whose ma married that white rancher. That's us, Chinese kids with a white stepfather, walking scandal. Living proof that the world doesn't end when people cross the lines the town drew. Something in Michael's expression shifted, interest warring with his determination to care about nothing. They say your family is weird, that you don't belong here. They say that a lot. Been saying it for months, doesn't make it true. Daniel skipped his own stone, watching it bounce 4 times before sinking. Doesn't make us leave either. We're here, we're staying, and eventually the town will either accept it or die mad about it. Michael laughed, a sound rusty from disuse. I like that, die mad about it. Tommy appeared next, always the peacemaker, always the one who made friends easily. Then Lily with her sketchbook offering to draw Michael's portrait if he'd sit still long enough. And finally Rose, who simply declared that Michael looked sad and needed a cookie, which she produced from her pocket, slightly crushed but offered with genuine warmth. By the end of that afternoon, Michael had found what he didn't know he'd been looking for. Not replacements for his parents, not a new family exactly, but kindred spirits. Other children who understood what it meant to be on the outside, to carry loss, to face a world that didn't want them, but couldn't break them. He started spending his days at the Morrison Ranch, helping with chores, learning to ride from Tommy, watching Lily draw, letting Rose chatter at him endlessly about nothing important. Jake taught him practical skills with the same patient attention he gave his own children, never pressing, never demanding gratitude, just offering knowledge and letting Michael decide whether to accept it. Mei Lin fed him, noticed he was too thin, made sure he ate until his ribs stopped showing, and when she saw the haunted look in his eyes, the look she recognized from her own mirror in the months after Robert died, she sat with him on the porch one evening and told him something true. Grief doesn't end. It just changes shape, becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. But you have to let it change. Have to let yourself heal, even though healing feels like betrayal. How? Michael's voice was raw. How do you let go when letting go means forgetting them? You don't let go. You hold on differently. You carry them forward in how you live, not in how you suffer. Your parents wouldn't want your grief to destroy you. They'd want your love for them to make you stronger. Pastor Hart discovered Michael's attachment to the Morrison family with dismay that quickly turned to anger. He confronted his grandson in the parlor, his voice tight with disapproval. I forbid you to spend time with those people. They are not appropriate company or a Christian boy. That woman is foreign, heathen. Those children are half-breeds. You will not associate with them. Michael, who had been passive about everything since arriving, found his spine in that moment. They're the only people in this whole town who've been kind to me. The only ones who treat me like I matter. So no, I won't stop seeing them. You will obey me, boy. I'm your guardian, your grandfather. You live under my roof. Then I'll leave. I'll live somewhere else. Anywhere else. Michael stood, facing down the old man with a courage born of having nothing left to fear. You took me in because you had to, not because you wanted to. You don't know me, don't care about me. Just want me to be quiet and grateful and not inconvenience you. The Morrisons actually see me, actually care. So you can forbid all you want, but I'm going back there tomorrow. Hart, confronted with open rebellion from a boy he didn't understand and didn't know how to reach, made the mistake of trying to enforce his will through force. He grabbed Michael's arm, intending to physically restrain him. Michael pulled away violently, stumbled backward, fell against the wood stove that was still warm from the morning fire. The burn wasn't severe, just a hand that blistered where it had pressed against hot metal. But it was enough. Michael ran from the house, ran through the town, ran to the only place that felt safe, the Morrison Ranch. Mei Lin treated the burn with practiced efficiency, cool water and clean bandages, and a salve she made from herbs she'd brought from China. Jake stood in the doorway, his face dark with controlled anger, while Michael explained what had happened. He didn't mean to hurt you, Mei Lin said gently, cleaning the wound. He was angry and you pulled away and accidents happen. But Michael, you can't stay here. You're a minor. He's your legal guardian. We could get in serious trouble for harboring you. Then I'll run away. I'll go back to St. Louis. I'll go anywhere but back to him. Running away isn't the answer either. Jake knelt in front of the boy, his voice firm but kind. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk to your grandfather. All of us together, and we're going to work this out like adults. You're going to tell him how you feel. He's going to listen. And we're going to find a way forward that doesn't involve anyone running or anyone getting hurt. The confrontation happened the next day in Hart's parlor, the same room where Michael had been burned. Hart sat stiffly in his chair, Jake and Mei Lin across from him, Michael between them like he needed their protection. The pastor's face was a mixture of shame and defiance, guilt about the burn warring with conviction that he'd been right to try to control the boy. Michael needs structure, Hart began, his voice defensive. Discipline, guidance away from influences that would corrupt him. Michael needs love, Mei Lin countered quietly. Needs to be seen and valued and allowed to grieve. Needs people who care about him, not about making him into what they think he should be. And you think you can provide that? A foreign woman and a man who's turned his back on his own kind? Jake's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. We think we can provide what every child needs: safety, acceptance, a place where he matters. Whether you approve of us or not is irrelevant. Michael has chosen to be with us. You can fight that and lose him entirely, or you can accept it and at least maintain some relationship with your grandson. You're poisoning him against me, against the church, against proper society. No, Michael spoke up, his voice stronger than it had been. They're not poisoning me. They're healing me. You want me to be grateful and obedient and quiet about my pain. They let me be angry and sad and real. You want me to fit into your perfect Christian box. They accept me as I am. Hart looked at his grandson, really looked at him, and saw for the first time how thin the boy had become, how hollow his eyes were, how much pain he carried. Saw too late that his rigid attempt at providing structure had only driven the boy further away. I don't know how to help you, Hart admitted, his voice breaking. I lost your mother when she moved to St. Louis. Lost her to distance and then to death. I don't know how to be what you need. Then let him spend time with us, Mei Lin said gently. Let him come to the ranch after school. Let him have dinner with us. Learn from Jake. Be around the children. You can still be his grandfather, can still have a relationship with him, but give him space to heal in his own way. It was a compromise born of desperation and good intentions. Hart agreed reluctantly that Michael could spend his afternoons and evenings at the Morrison Ranch as long as he came home to sleep. It wasn't ideal for anyone, but it was better than the alternative of complete rupture. For 3 weeks it worked. Michael flourished under the Morrison family's care, put on weight, smiled more, talked about possibly staying in Montana instead of running back to St. Louis. He found purpose helping with the ranch work, found belonging in the children's easy acceptance, found hope in seeing a family that had survived loss and prejudice and come out stronger. Then came the day that changed everything. Michael had been helping Jake repair fence on the far side of the property when he mentioned wanting to explore the creek that ran through Morrison land. Jake, busy with the fence and trusting the boy's growing competence, agreed. Stay where I can hear you holler if you need help. Don't go past the bend where the current gets fast. Michael promised, meaning it. But 14-year-old boys have a way of forgetting promises when adventure calls. He followed the creek past the bend, scrambling over rocks, losing track of time and distance. When he tried to cross at a point that looked shallow, the current caught him. His foot wedged between two rocks, and when he pulled it free, he lost his balance and fell, cracking his head on a boulder. Jake found him an hour later, unconscious in shallow water, a gash on his head bleeding sluggishly. He carried the boy back to the ranch house, shouting for Mei Lin, his heart hammering with fear that felt too familiar, too much like the terror of watching Lily nearly die from fever. Mei Lin assessed the damage with steady hands despite her racing heart. Concussion, definitely. Possible skull fracture. No way to know how severe without time. They needed Doc Fletcher, but he was making rounds to homesteads 30 miles away. Wouldn't be back until tomorrow at the earliest. We need to tell Hart, Jake said. He needs to know. They sent Daniel on the fastest horse to fetch the pastor. Hart arrived within the hour, his face ashen with fear, and found Michael laid out in the Morrison guest room, Mei Lin keeping watch with the practiced vigilance of someone who'd nursed people through crisis before. Will he live? Hart's voice shook. I don't know. The next 24 hours will tell. If he wakes, that's good. If he doesn't, or if he wakes confused and violent, that could mean brain damage. All we can do is watch and wait and pray. Hart sank into the chair beside the bed, took his grandson's hand in his own weathered ones. This is my fault. I drove him here, drove him away from me with my rigidity and my judgment and my inability to see him for who he is instead of who I wanted him to be. It's not your fault, Mei Lin said firmly. It's an accident, just an accident. Boys explore, boys take risks. This could have happened anywhere. But it happened here because I made him feel unwelcome in his own home, because I couldn't accept that what he needed was different from what I thought he should need. They kept vigil together through that long night, Hart and Mei Lin taking turns, Jake hovering nearby, the Morrison children checking in with worried faces and whispered prayers. Somewhere in those dark hours, something shifted in Pastor William Hart's soul. He watched Mei Lin change cool cloths on his grandson's forehead with gentle efficiency, watched her dose the unconscious boy with medicines to prevent infection, watched her pray in Chinese to her Buddhist goddess while Hart prayed in English to his Christian God, both of them asking the same thing from different heavens. Help him. Save him. Let him live. Why? Hart asked around midnight, when exhaustion had stripped away his defenses. Why are you doing this? Helping us when I've been one of your worst enemies? When I've preached against you, turned the church against you, made your lives harder in every way I could? Mei Lin looked at him with eyes that held more wisdom than her years should have permitted. Because Michael is a child who needs help. Because that's what human beings do for each other when the walls come down and we remember we're all just fragile creatures trying to survive. Because my children are watching, and I need them to learn that we help people who need help. Period. No conditions, no keeping score. You're a better Christian than I am, and you're not even Christian. Christianity doesn't have a monopoly on compassion, Pastor. Buddhism teaches us that all life is suffering, and our duty is to reduce suffering where we can. Your Jesus taught something similar, I think. Love your neighbor, show mercy, judge not. We're not so different, your faith and mine. We've just been using different words to say the same things. Hart wept then, the kind of tears that come from a soul cracking open and releasing decades of certainty. I've been so wrong about you, about all of it. I used God's word to justify my prejudice, used the Bible to make myself feel righteous about cruelty. What kind of shepherd does that make me? The kind who can still change, Mei Lin said. The kind who can still learn. The kind who can admit error and choose better. That's all any of us can do. Michael woke at dawn, groggy and confused but awake. His eyes focused on his grandfather's face, tear-stained and exhausted, and on Mei Lin standing behind him with a gentle smile. Did I die? Michael asked, his voice rough. No, son. You lived. Thanks to Mrs. Morrison and her care. Thanks to this family who had every reason to turn us away but didn't. Hart squeezed his grandson's hand. I'm sorry. For everything. For being rigid and cold, and more concerned with appearances than with you. For driving you here. For all of it. Not your fault. Was stupid. Went too far. Fell. Even so, when you're well, things are going to be different. I'm going to be different. I promise you that. The following Sunday, Pastor William Hart stood in his pulpit before a full congregation and delivered a sermon that would be remembered for generations. He began with the usual opening, the reading of Scripture, the familiar rhythms that put people at ease. Then he set down his Bible and looked out at his flock with eyes that had been opened by nearly losing someone he loved. I stand before you today as a hypocrite and a sinner, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the small church. I have preached love while practicing hate. I have preached charity while turning my back on neighbors in need. I have preached Christ's message while forgetting Christ's most basic command. Love one another. That's what he said. Not love those who look like you, not love those who come from where you come from, not love those who believe exactly what you believe. Just love one another. The congregation shifted uncomfortably. This was not the sermon they expected. My grandson nearly died this week, cracked his head on a rock, and lay unconscious, while I wondered if God was taking him from me the way he took my daughter. And do you know who saved him? Do you know who sat up all night keeping watch, dosing him with medicines, praying for his life? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. Mei Lin Morrison, the Chinese woman many of you call heathen, the woman I myself have called inappropriate company for Christian children, the woman we've shunned and gossiped about and done everything in our power to drive from this community. She saved my grandson's life. She showed mercy when I gave her cruelty. She demonstrated Christ's love better than I ever have from this pulpit. People began to murmur, some in agreement, some in protest. Hart raised his hand for silence. Jake Morrison and Mei Lin Morrison are better Christians than most of us. And she's not even Christian. They saved Jack Brenton's wife when he'd spent months trying to destroy them. They took in my grandson when I'd made him feel unwelcome. They've shown kindness to everyone who's needed it, regardless of how they've been treated in return. And what have we shown them? What have I shown them? His voice broke. I have used God's word to justify my prejudice, have preached the Bible while ignoring its central message, have called myself a shepherd while behaving like a wolf, and I am ashamed. The church was silent now, everyone transfixed by the sight of their pastor breaking down, admitting fault, confessing sins they'd all participated in. If we truly want to be followers of Christ, if we truly want to call ourselves Christians, then we must welcome all God's children. We must see past the color of skin to the content of character. We must judge people by their actions, not their ancestry. And by that measure, the Morrison family has shown more grace and goodness than most of us can claim. He looked directly at where Jake and Mei Lin sat in their usual back pew. 4 children between them, all of them frozen in shock at this public vindication. I was wrong to preach against you, wrong to turn this church against you, wrong in every way that matters. And I ask your forgiveness, though I don't deserve it. I ask it publicly before this congregation, so they can witness my repentance and perhaps examine their own hearts. Silence. Hart waited, his future hanging in the balance, his reputation as a spiritual leader dependent on this moment. Then Mei Lin stood, walked down the center aisle with Jake beside her, their children following. The whole church held its breath, wondering what she would do, what she would say. She stopped before the pulpit, looked up at the old man with tears on his face, and spoke words that echoed in that space like a benediction. We forgive you, Pastor Hart. We've always forgiven you. We've just been waiting for you to be ready to accept that forgiveness. Hart came down from the pulpit, and in front of the entire congregation, he embraced Jake Morrison and then Mei Lin, breaking every social convention, shattering every unwritten rule about race and propriety and appropriate behavior. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for showing me what faith really looks like. The congregation erupted, not in unified agreement, but in chaos. Some people stood and applauded, moved by Hart's courage and the Morrisons' grace. Others sat stunned, uncertain how to process this upheaval of everything they'd believed. A few walked out, unable to accept this reversal, this admission that the Chinese woman might be right and they might be wrong. But enough people stood, enough people applauded, enough people saw the truth in Hart's words and the grace in the Morrisons' response to begin a shift that would transform the community. Sarah Cunningham stood, her applause fierce and defiant. Doc Fletcher stood, his weathered face creased in a smile. Samuel Cooper stood, nodding his approval. And slowly, one by one, others joined them. Margaret Brennan stood, pulling her reluctant husband up with her. The school teacher, Mrs. Henderson, stood, shame written across her face. The owner of the feed store stood. The banker's wife stood. Not everyone, not a majority even, but enough. Enough to show the Morrison family that Hart's transformation wasn't isolated, that his words had touched hearts that had been waiting for permission to feel differently. After the service, people approached the Morrisons with awkward apologies and tentative overtures of friendship. It wasn't a complete reversal, wasn't a unanimous embrace, but it was something. It was a start. The real change came slowly over the weeks and months that followed. Mrs. Henderson approached Mei Lin and asked if Daniel might return to school, admitted she'd been wrong to exclude him. The feed store owner offered Jake credit again, said his money was as good as anyone's. The women of the church invited Mei Lin to their quilting circle, stumbling over their words but sincere in their desire to make amends. Not everyone changed. Some people remained convinced that racial mixing was wrong, that Chinese people didn't belong, that the Morrisons were corrupting the community's values. But those voices grew quieter as others grew louder, as the majority slowly shifted from silent disapproval to quiet acceptance to, in some cases, genuine friendship. Michael Hart, recovered from his injury, became a fixture at the Morrison Ranch and announced his intention to become a minister like his grandfather. But a different kind of minister, he said, the kind who practiced what he preached, who loved everybody, who judged people by their character instead of their origin. You've shown me what real faith looks like, he told Jake and Mei Lin. Not the kind that hides behind rules and traditions. The kind that gets its hands dirty helping people. The kind that chooses mercy over judgment. That's the kind of minister I want to be. Summer came to Montana with a glory that made the harsh winter seem like a distant dream. The Morrison Ranch flourished, the cattle thriving, the gardens producing abundance. Mei Lin's vegetables, grown from seeds she'd carefully preserved, fed not just their family but neighbors who'd discovered that Chinese farming techniques produced impressive yields. In August, Jake and Mei Lin decided to host a harvest festival, inviting the whole community to celebrate the season and the slow healing of old wounds. They expected maybe 20 people. Nearly 100 came. The ranch overflowed with families, children running in packs, adults sharing food and conversation, and the kind of easy fellowship that had seemed impossible just months before. Chinese dishes sat beside American fare on long tables. Music played, a fiddle and a harmonica creating melodies that people danced to regardless of their origin. Daniel, now 14 and suddenly tall, helped organize games for the younger children. Tommy raced horses with other boys his age, his natural skill winning admirers. Lily displayed her artwork, and people bought pieces to hang in their homes, seeing beauty they'd been too prejudiced to notice before. Rose charmed everyone who would listen, her innocent joy infectious. And Jake and Mei Lin stood together watching it all, watching the community they'd helped transform through nothing more than refusing to become what hate wanted them to be. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Mei Lin asked, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "From that Christmas morning when you showed up with food to this? No, couldn't have imagined this. Thought we'd always be outsiders, always be fighting. We're still outsiders to some, still fighting in small ways. But this," she gestured at the crowd, at the laughter, at people of different backgrounds choosing to come together. "This is more than I ever hoped for." Pastor Hart found them as the sun was setting, Michael at his side. The boy had grown close to his grandfather in the months since his injury, the two of them learning to talk honestly, to share grief, to build a relationship based on truth instead of expectations. "I wanted to thank you again," Hart said, "for everything. For Michael, yes, but more than that, for showing me what I'd become, for giving me a chance to be better." "You're showing yourself what you can be," Jake said. "We just held up a mirror. You're the one doing the hard work of change." "Still, thank you." Hart paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I've been thinking about legacy lately, about what I'll leave behind when I'm gone. Used to think it would be the church I built, the sermons I preached. Now I think it's going to be this, the transformation I witnessed and participated in, the lesson that love is stronger than hate, that grace defeats prejudice, that we can change if we're willing to do the work." "That's a legacy worth having," Mei Lin said softly. The years that followed were not without difficulty. Prejudice didn't vanish overnight. Some people never changed their minds, never accepted the Morrison family, never moved past their conviction that racial mixing was wrong. But the majority slowly came around, not through being preached at, but through witnessing the living example of a family that thrived despite opposition, that showed grace in the face of cruelty, that built something beautiful from the ruins of loss. 5 years after that Christmas morning, when Jake Morrison drove his wagon down to a starving widow's cabin, the Morrison family gathered on the porch of the ranch house for a photograph that would hang in the Montana Historical Society generations later. Jake Morrison, now 57, his hair more gray than brown, but his eyes still sharp and clear. Mei Lin beside him, 39 and more beautiful than ever, her face showing the character that comes from surviving trials and emerging stronger. Daniel at 18, tall and serious, preparing to leave for law school with plans to fight for immigrants' rights. Tommy at 15, already showing the horse training talent that would make him renowned across the territory. Lily at 13, her artwork hanging in galleries as far away as San Francisco. And Rose at 11, bright and fearless and utterly certain of her place in the world. Standing with them in the photograph were others who'd become family through choice rather than blood. Doc Fletcher, retired now, but still making rounds when needed. Sarah Cunningham and her new husband, a widower she'd met through the church. Samuel Cooper, his forge still ringing, but his heart finally at peace. Pastor Hart and Michael, the older man's arm around his grandson's shoulders. The photograph captured more than faces. It captured a moment when hate had been defeated by love, when prejudice had been overcome by persistence, when the courage to stand for what was right had transformed not just one family, but an entire community. That evening, after the photographer had packed up his equipment and the visitors had gone home, Jake and Mei Lin sat in their usual spot on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. "Do you remember that first night?" Mei Lin asked. "When you stayed because of the storm? When we sat here talking and I was too proud to admit how desperate we were? I remember thinking you were the strongest person I'd ever met. Remember knowing I was in trouble because I was starting to care. I thought you were Papa Christmas, sent by God or fate or random chance to save us. Didn't know you were saving yourself too." Jake pulled her close, breathed in the scent of her hair, felt gratitude so profound it hurt. "We saved each other. That's what love does. Finds broken people and makes them whole again." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell, as stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. Inside the house, children's voices rose and fell, Daniel explaining something to his sisters, Tommy teasing Rose, the ordinary sounds of family that had once seemed impossible. "What do you think the winter taught us?" Mei Lin asked quietly. "That last winter before everything changed?" Jake thought about it, about the starvation and the fear and the prejudice they'd faced, about the courage it had taken to love when love seemed dangerous, to hope when hope seemed foolish, to build when everything around them was falling apart. It taught us that family isn't about blood. It's about choice, about standing with people when it's hard, not just when it's easy. It taught us that love is stronger than hate if we're brave enough to keep choosing it. It taught us that we can survive anything if we have each other. And that mercy is more powerful than revenge, Mei Lin added. That showing grace to our enemies changes us more than it changes them. That we become what we practice, so we better practice goodness. All of that. And one more thing. Jake turned to face her, his eyes reflecting starlight. It taught me that it's never too late to start over. Never too late to choose life over death, love over loneliness, hope over despair. I was 52 years old, convinced my life was over. You showed me it was just beginning. Mei Lin kissed him, soft and sweet, a kiss that still held the promise of forever even after 5 years of marriage. And you showed me that the human heart can expand to hold both grief and joy, both memory and hope, both the love we lost and the love we found. They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, until the stars were bright overhead and the world was quiet except for the wind through the pines. Stayed together in the place they'd built through courage and stubbornness, and the refusal to let hate define who they became. Inside, they found all 4 children still awake, gathered in the parlor with books and games and the easy companionship of siblings who genuinely liked each other. Daniel looked up from the law book he was studying. "We've been talking," he said, gesturing to include his siblings, "about the winter, about how it changed everything, about what we learned." "And what did you learn?" Jake asked, settling into his chair while Mei Lin perched on the arm. "That courage isn't the absence of fear," Daniel said. "It's acting despite fear. You were both terrified, I know that now. terrified of loving again, of losing again, of standing up to the town, but you did it anyway. I learned that kindness is a choice, Tommy added, that we can choose to be kind even when people are cruel to us, that breaking the cycle of hate starts with one person deciding to be better. Lily spoke next, her artist's eyes seeing deeper than most. I learned that beauty exists even in hard times, that creating something good in the middle of suffering is an act of rebellion, that making art or making family or making love when the world says you should give up is the bravest thing you can do. Rose, youngest but never to be left out, piped up with simple wisdom that cut to the heart of it. I learned that family is who loves you. Papa Jake isn't my blood papa, but he's my real papa because he chose to be. That's better than blood. That's forever. Jake's throat was tight, his eyes wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. You learned well, all of you, and you're going to take these lessons out into the world and make it better. That's your legacy. That's what that winner was for. Not just to save you then, but to teach you how to save others later. Mei Lin stood, moved to the center of the room where all her children could see her. Your father, your first father, Robert Chen, made me promise when he was dying that I would live. Not just survive, but truly live. That I would find joy again, find love again, find hope again. For years, I didn't understand how I could do that without betraying his memory. She looked at Jake, her eyes full of love that encompassed both past and present. Then Jake showed me that honoring Robert meant living the way Robert would have wanted, with courage, with integrity, with open hearts. Robert would have loved Jake, would have called him brother, would have been glad his children had such a father. And Sarah would have loved your mother, Jake added, would have welcomed her as a sister, would have been glad I found my way back to living instead of just existing. Our first loves didn't die so we could suffer forever. They died having loved us, and we honor them by loving again, by living fully, by refusing to let loss make us small. The children were crying now, that good kind of crying that comes from understanding something profound, from seeing the truth of their parents' courage, from recognizing the gift they'd been given. We're so lucky, Daniel said, his voice breaking. So many kids lose a parent, and that's the end of their story. We lost our father and found another. Lost everything and built something better. That's not just luck. That's you two refusing to give up. That's all of us refusing to give up, Mei Lin corrected. You children were brave too. Brave enough to accept Jake. Brave enough to face the town. Brave enough to let love in when loss had made you wary. This family exists because all 6 of us chose it. They stayed together late into the night, talking and remembering and planning for futures that seemed bright with possibility. Daniel's dreams of law school and fighting for justice. Tommy's plans to establish a horse training operation that would welcome everyone regardless of race. Lily's artwork that would challenge people to see beauty in unexpected places. Rose's simple certainty that she would make the world kinder, one person at a time. When the children finally went to bed, when the house settled into quiet, Jake and Mei Lin returned to the porch for a final moment alone beneath the stars. 5 years, Mei Lin marveled. 5 years since that Christmas. Feels like yesterday and like a lifetime ago all at once. Best 5 years of my life. Better than I deserved. Better than I dared hope for. We both deserved happiness, Jake. We both earned it through suffering and survival, and the courage to keep reaching for it even when it seemed impossible. They stood together, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest season and built a light that still burned bright. 2 people who'd faced hate with love, cruelty with grace, despair with stubborn hope. 2 people who'd proven that family could be chosen, that love could grow in the coldest winters, that the human spirit could triumph over prejudice and loss and fear. The mountains rose dark against the star-filled sky, eternal and unchanging. But the people beneath those mountains had changed, had been transformed by the simple revolutionary act of loving across boundaries others had drawn, of choosing mercy over revenge, of building instead of destroying. The winter that had nearly killed them had instead given them life, had forced them together when the world tried to keep them apart, had tested them in every way possible and found them strong enough to weather it all. Thank you, Jake said quietly. For what? For taking a chance on a broken man in a buffalo coat who showed up at your door with supplies and terrible lies about the church sending him. For seeing past the rough exterior to whatever was underneath. for loving me despite my ghosts and my grief and my fear. Thank you for saving us, for showing up when no one else would, for standing with us when the whole town turned away, for being brave enough to love again when you'd convinced yourself you never would. We saved each other. Yes, we did. They went inside finally, into warmth and light in the home they'd built together. Climbed the stairs to the bedroom they shared, passing children's rooms where young ones slept safe and warm and loved beyond measure. In bed, Mei Lin curled against Jake's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Do you think they'll remember, she asked quietly. Years from now, when we're gone and they're old, do you think they'll remember what we built here? What we proved was possible? They'll remember, and they'll pass it on to their children, and those children will pass it on to theirs. The story of how love defeated hate, how courage overcame fear, how a family was built not from blood but from choice. That story matters, Mei Lin. That story will outlive us both. Good, then it was all worth it. Every hard moment, every tear, every battle, all worth it. They fell asleep holding each other, two souls that had been shattered and remade, two hearts that had been frozen and thawed, two lives that had intersected in a Montana winter and created something that would echo through generations. Outside, snow began to fall again, the first snow of a new winter. But this time it fell on a house that was warm and full, on a family that was strong and united, on a community that was slowly learning what the Morrison family had always known. That love is stronger than hate, that mercy defeats cruelty, that choosing to be better instead of bitter is the most powerful act of rebellion against injustice. That family is built by choice and strengthened by courage and proven by standing together when the world says you should stand apart. The snow fell through the night, covering the world in white, making everything clean and new again. And in the morning, 6 people would wake in a house built on love, surrounded by land they'd defended with grace, part of a community they'd transformed through simple, stubborn goodness. The last winter had given way to spring, and spring had led to summer, and summer had mellowed into fall, and now another winter was beginning. But this time they would face it together, prepared and unafraid, knowing that whatever came, they had each other. And that, in the end, was everything. The Morrison family slept through that first snowfall of the new winter, safe and warm and loved, living proof that courage and love, and the refusal to surrender to hate, could change not just individual lives, but the whole world around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to show grace, to choose mercy, to build instead of destroy. But tonight, they simply rested in the home they'd made, the family they'd chosen, the love they'd fought for and won. The winter that had almost destroyed them had instead transformed them into something stronger, something better, something that would endure long after the snow melted and spring came again. And in the quiet of that Montana night, as snow fell soft and silent on the roof, 6 hearts beat as one, bound together by choices made in the hardest season, proven by trials that would have broken lesser souls, united by love that had survived every test and emerged victorious. The last winter before everything changed had taught them the most important lesson of all. That love, real love, the kind that chooses and commits and stands firm in the face of opposition, is the most powerful force in the world. More powerful than prejudice, more powerful than hate, more powerful even than death. And that lesson would echo through the years, through the children they raised, and the community they transformed, and the lives they touched, a ripple that would spread outward long after they were gone. The Morrison family. 6 souls who proved that family is choice, that love conquers hate, and that the bravest thing you can do is open your heart again after it's been shattered. That was the legacy. That was the gift. That was what the winter had given them. Everything.